What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Normal America Show with your very ill-prepared host, Rob Nora. Gonna do a debate tonight. Hoping to get my ass kicked. Oh, I'm not supposed to swear. Hoping to get my butt kicked. It'd be nice, just once, it'd be nice to lose a debate. Make me feel human. Humiliate me a little. Wouldn't that be nice? It's a good stream. I gotta be honest, my head's not in this at all right now for two reasons. One, I just got home like 15 minutes ago. It was a fantastic day. We took my son to see the Easter Bunny with my parents. It was a blast. He did fantastic. You have to understand, the Easter Bunny's a little creepier than Santa Claus because the Easter Bunny doesn't talk, right? Like he's not like, so he's just like, it's a little bit creepier, So that's number one. The other thing is, when it comes to the Easter Bunny, is like the big head is a little off-putting. But Hank he was a trooper. He was on the hunt at this particular store. It's where we always go see Santa Claus. It's about an hour and a half away. He was on the hunt for what he kept calling a Robo T-Rex. We had no idea what he was talking about. So, I think we found it. He's happy with his purchases there. There's a lot of fun. He purchased some dragon figurines and stuff. He's pumped. He's very pumped. It's good stuff. It was all good stuff. So can't speak highly enough about today. It was a lot of fun. And then we went to Courtney's parents for dinner, and so we're just getting back for dinner. But the other reason that no one's going to care about, except maybe the one or two people that live locally that watch me, is someone sent me this story about the college that's right where I went to college. It's right down the road from me here. The two of the bars in town are both owned by this same guy, and there's this big controversy going on. And I know all of the characters involved, and I find it just absolutely hilarious. Basically, here's the story. This dude that's running the bar is like this perpetual drunk. And they have free jukebox night. So these people come in that are sort of like from town but haven't been here for a while. And they go up to play music in the jukebox. And I won't use that colorful a language, but basically this guy was like, I don't want to hear none of that black people music. Well, it turns out some of the people didn't appreciate the comment, who had significant others that were black or children that were black, etc. And it led to an argument with this customer who then left, and other patrons upset in the bar. One of the workers of the bar getting upset, arguing with the manager. The manager was drunk and basically chewed her out. She then ends up leaving. Now, this guy manages this bar and owns another bar in town, and basically every one of his employees have walked out, and it's not just this racially insensitive comment, it's also the fact that apparently he's just like a bully and a drunk, I know the guy, that's pretty accurate, and so now it's like this big, like, there's gonna be like a March on Selma in my local town. So it's like, well, what's this debate about tonight? It was about Trump's administration. Yeah, sure, great, sounds good. But part of me's like, I don't really care. I just want to talk about my hometown bar. It's not funny to anyone else. I know it's not, but knowing all the characters, it's just hilarious to me. It's like, oh boy, and another free jukebox night fight. I've seen several of these in my time at that part. Now, here's two problems that I'm having with tonight. Well, three. One, damn you, Trump. Couldn't you have the stock market do good today? Couldn't this debate have been yesterday while the stock market was doing good? And then I could have been like, stock market's killing it. Curses. I didn't even know. I didn't check my phone all day today. We finally get to my wife's family, and I'm like, oh, let's check. It's like 4:45. Let's check how the stock market's doing. Whoopsie daisy, not so hot today. So that's number one. Number two, they still haven't sent me the link to StreamYard, which... they said it'd be an hour before. So I'm waiting for that. Instead of an email, might be easier to just do this. Oh, no. There we go. Let me make sure I got the time right, because I've been known to do that. Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Today's Thursday. It's 8 p.m. Eastern time. Said he'll send a link an hour before. Well, that would have been 7 p.m. Here's the other problem I'm having. Some guy named Alex. I don't know much about him. I've never seen him. I don't know how to... apparently this debate's going to occur through Jake Rattlesnake's StreamYard, and I've never streamed to StreamYard while streaming to StreamYard. So I'm currently streaming on StreamYard right now. So I don't know exactly, being a technological illiterate. I'm hoping I could figure it out once I was hoping he sent me the link a little before the debate so I could monkey with it here before we hopped in. That was my plan. I'm sure I'll figure it out. Yeah, I think there's a string together feature, but I doubt he's going to use that. Now, I thought what I could do is, because I'm using the OBS virtual camera, I could just do my camera and then, like, let me show you this. Do something like this. Present, share screen, YouTube, and then do this, right? Just like this. And so then you'll see his screen, is what I'm hoping. But I don't know. There, I just removed myself. What am I doing? So, now listen. I'm not going to, I like Jake a lot, so I'm not going to talk trash on him, but there is a perpetual issue with when you're doing these debates and stuff of things never occurring on time. I feel like I'm like one of the only people. I'm like cutting my dinner short with my family to be like, hey, we gotta get back here so I could stream right at 8:00. And this is Thursday, right? I'm not missing anything. I hope it says 8 p.m. Eastern, Thursday. That's today. Unless they meant, surely they didn't mean next week. Right? Thursday. Hey, Rob, do you want to debate my channel about Trump's first month? Sure. I'm free Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Thursday, 8 p.m. work. Other guy confirmed. Sure. Send me an email. Okay, sends me the email. This is so funny. Email. Okay. Here are the details. The prompt. The topic is, has Trump's second term been a success so far? 2-hour debate, including super chats, 2 to 5 minute opening statements, 60 to 90 minutes moderated open dialogue, 2 minutes closing, super chats and call-ins if we have time. Happy to promote anything. You don't have to promote anything for me. We'll send link to StreamYard just before the debate. Oh, just before debate via email and X. Well, I would say 4 minutes before is just before. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay. Well, here we go. Anyways. No, it's Thursday at 8 p.m. So here's my preparation. I'll show you. This is my preparation I've done for this debate. I wrote some Trump accomplishments. So, I don't know. It depends on how we go. I thought about being like a little semantic, because originally the topic is like, was Trump doing good or bad? And I'm not trying to be a jerk when I say this, but like, for whom? Isn't that like sort of built in? How do you determine? Because I have a feeling, I believe the only thing I know is, I assume I know that the guy I'm debating against will take the side that Trump's been bad. I think he's progressive. From the perspective of a progressive, he's certainly been bad. Like, for example, is eliminating DEI a good thing or a bad thing? I think, subjectively, I think it's obviously a good thing, but objectively, I think it is as well. But if you're someone who likes DEI, you think that's terrible. The problem is with sort of determining we're basically 3 months in, how to put a metric on, is things good or not? And I think I was talking about this in stream last night. It's like, people want to celebrate when, like, oh, this guy's been appointed, so that's it. That's good. He'll do good. Will he? I hope. So, for example, I like Kash Patel, but what if he fails? What if he doesn't do anything of note? Right? It's the same. Well, this bill, the SAVE Act, just passed Congress today. Okay. But what if it doesn't do anything? Sounds good. But what if there's zero real world effect that comes about from this bill? Then what? You see what I mean? So it's like, it's very early, 3 months into a presidency to judge. Now, I know my opponent's going to want to talk about the stock market and probably want to talk about Trump's a criminal and he's ignoring courts and all that. We can talk about all that stuff. I have no problem with it. But when you talk about, like, is someone good or bad this early before, it's not like 2 years in where you'll be able to look and be like, well, we have bigger wealth disparity and the GDP's gone down and, where you have more static numbers. We have a very small snapshot. And even the stock market going down, as we've seen this week, you could see just from, like, everybody's making a fool of themselves. Like Monday it goes down, the NASDAQ basically breaks here, or last Friday it went down. Then Monday it was like, it's going to be Black Monday. Monday wasn't that bad. Then Tuesday, stocks opened up, and you had a bunch of people being like, aha, see, look, stocks are up. Then they fall way down by the end of the night. Then Wednesday, Trump announces a pause on tariffs, and stocks go through the roof. Single biggest day in the history of the Dow Jones. What did I say last night in the show? I anticipate that stocks are going to recede from where they're at today. I don't know how much. My guess will be, even if things go well, we will not get to a break-even point on where stocks were when Trump entered, at least for many months. That's what I said. And so people, when you're just looking at a day or a week of stock market, now it could very well be that Trump's plan's a disaster and it'll perpetually crash the stock market. That could be, but it's hard to look at that with like 1 week's worth of data. Brock Van Wagner for $20 says, thanks, Rob, for being so grounded politically. I see too many people on the right. Unfortunately, many of them are my fellow DeSantis supporters who have TDS. Personally, I think if you have TDS, then your opinion has no merit. Thank you, man. I'm appreciative that I'm someone that you enjoy hearing from. I really am. It means a lot. I get comments like that all the time. Sometimes I'll be honest, being as busy as I am and stuff, sometimes it's a bit of a chore to try to make sure that I'm keeping up with stuff and capable of having at least a layman's informed opinion. And it's nice to hear that there are people that appreciate hearing from me. So I really like that. Well, it's 8:01 and I still haven't heard from anyone involved in the debate. Let's see if Jake's streaming. I do this stuff all the time. And then it'll be like, oh yeah, that's not today. Like what we met next Thursday. No, he's not streaming right now. And what's really a bummer is I had another offer tonight. So if this falls through, like I had someone else that wanted to call in and do a debate and a conversation. And that'll be a bummer. And I don't have the contact info for the guy I'm supposed to debate. So I wouldn't even know how to like just hook up with him without a moderator. Let me check. He did send me a... Give me a second here. Oh, boy. Fuck! Oh, piss on this. Well, there's no debate tonight. This was the second email that was sent to me today. I'll put it in the chat. Oh, mother. That's frustrating. Now I'm going to read to you this exchange. Hey, Rob, you want to do a debate on my channel soon with a lib about whether Trump's first few months have been good or bad? That was this Monday. I say, sure. I'm usually free Wednesday, Thursdays, and Fridays. He says, Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Work? Adam is confirmed. I said, yeah, that should work. Then Tuesday, he says, lock it in. Send me your email and I'll send you the details. I send him the email Tuesday. He says, there's a Marxist versus capitalist debate happening right now. He sent last night. I said I would join, but I'm working. No problem, man. So I assumed he was meant this Thursday. So then he sent the email today. And the email today is like, hi, gents. Here's some debates details for Thursday, April 17th. But I assumed he asked Thursday, so I assumed it was this Thursday. I'm on the road with my family this morning, driving out. So by the time I get to the Easter Bunny place, I check my emails. Oh, the debate's tonight. He sent me the email deets. Oh, man. I planned my whole day around this. It gives Trump another week to score more wins. I'm so sorry for swearing, too. Thank you, Contemporary Compendium, for the $5. I'm so sorry. Does anybody want to call in and debate? Oh, bummer. No, it's, if anything, it's my fault. It was an assumption on my part. And I've been on the road all day today. I've checked my phone for like 3 minutes in total all day today. I was fully prepared. The debate was tonight. He said, can you do it Thursday? I didn't. I assumed if he meant next Thursday, he would say next Thursday. So when he said, can you do it Thursday at 8 p.m., I assumed he meant this Thursday at 8 p.m. I said, sure. And then when I saw the email come in today, which is Thursday, and said, here's the time format, I said, sounds good. Looking forward to it. That's it. Also, he said 8 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, it says 8 p.m. Eastern time. Yeah. So now I look like a doofus to my audience, to Jake, because I'm like messaging him. I'm like, hey man, where's the link? It's like 8 o'clock. Sorry about the cursing. I need to cut back on that. Well, boy, I'm ill prepared to talk about anything tonight, seeing as how I literally haven't looked at anything all day. Well, next Thursday should work. Courtney versus Rob, but you don't want to see me and Courtney debate. If you want to debate me right now, you have to take the Trump bad position. If you're not really feeling it, don't do that just for the sake of it. We could do a call-in show. That I could do, but that was the plan tomorrow. I am. I'm viewer farm of fake titles. Yeah. By the way, I didn't think that word was titles. I thought that said something else. I was like, should I put my man's-ear on? I assure you, they're real. Double call-in show. I suppose I could. That's probably what we're going to end up doing. No, I haven't seen Jim Bob debating Air Day. That's funny. Let's see, real quick, if anybody's on Discord, I could chum in. What a mess. I feel really bad too because I rushed out of like dinner. My son was having so much fun at his grandparents' place, and I was like, buddy, we gotta go. I'm going to be late for this debate. And one thing about me, like me or hate me, I do try to always be prompt when I'm dealing with other people's time. Uh, because I don't want someone to have to sit here and wait for me while I'm late streaming. So I was like sort of rushing along. Uh, okay. Well, here's the link. If anyone wants to call in, we talk about whatever. So we could do this. Do call-ins. I could review a debate that I haven't seen. I haven't really watched much. Today while I was driving, I listened to Alex Jones on on Tucker Carlson's show. That's always fun. I always like listening to my boy Alex. But if anyone wants to call in, we can talk about any topic. I don't mind that. There's the link to the StreamYard. You don't need a camera, you just need a microphone. Oh man. I was like double sure I was right today. I was like, the time's right. I know he's in a different time zone. We're all good because I think he's in Australia. So I'm like, we're good. We're good. Make sure that I had the correct Eastern time, and I didn't check the date. I assumed because he said Thursday, he meant this Thursday, not next Thursday. And I didn't bother to read the date. So bummer, but I was ready to go. I think it's a mistake for my opponent. If I was my opponent, I'd want to jump in. Fortin Spartan says, Rob, if no callers, give my opinion on the productivity wage gap statistics, your thought and what should be done about it. Now, I'm not quite sure that I've seen the data you're talking about. I assume, though, just because I know words, that there is probably statistics that show that like something like 10% of all workers, like, I don't know, like more productive people are making not as much money as they should, or that like a very small proportion of workers are actually accomplishing the most work. There's Justin Mike. He was talking trash on Trump yesterday. There he is. Maybe you would like to call in. You could talk about the bond market, and you could talk about Trump's tariffs and how terrible he is, right? Pirates PR mistake. I could talk a little about the Pirates, but people wouldn't want to hear it. But I can. Did I see the Judiciary Committee with the Facebook whistleblower? I saw parts of it. Now, my understanding is what this whistleblower said was basically there were two things that I thought was of note. The first was that basically it gave a backdoor access, despite the fact of what Zuckerberg said, it gave backdoor access to Americans' information to the Chinese government. That was the big thing that came out of that, right? I forget what the second thing I made a mental note of, like, that was important. The pirates thing, for those that don't know, like, the biggest pirate from a historical perspective is probably Roberto Clemente. Now, it's arguable. You could say Honus Wagner or Ralph Kiner or Willie Stargell, or, maybe you'd say Dave Parker in some ways. Maybe you'd say Barry Bonds, at least what he went on to become. But as far as like a story, Roberto Clemente, many consider to have basically done for Latino players what Jackie Robinson did for black players. And at least that's the way it's sold to you here in Pennsylvania. I don't think it's quite that. But certainly he was one of the first people of Hispanic origin to break in a big way. So he's dearly loved, rightfully so, in Pittsburgh. So we have a statue and a bridge named after him. Well, at PNC Park in 2022, I think it's the right field wall. They had a Clemente's number up on the wall, and the Pirates, who are abysmal and have one of the worst owner in professional sports, decided to take down that commemorative sign for Clemente and put up an ad for like a seltzer or some crap. And so Roberto Clemente's son spoke up about how this is crap. Hot take. I'm not that upset about it. It's certainly bad from a PR perspective, but when you really look at the story, it's not what it seems. Basically, what happened was that was always an ad spot at PNC Park, but during like 2022, when COVID hit, they were having trouble getting ads, and so they just had blank ad space. And so it's like, well, let's just throw Clemente's number up there. And then this year, they had more advertisers. So they're looking at some of the former places that they had ads and saying, okay, let's add it there, let's add it there, let's add it there. One of them had to be this spot. It was never oh, this is Clemente, like the statue, or it's not like they took down the statue or they renamed the Clemente Bridge or anything like that. But from a PR perspective, the Pirates are so bad. They have a generational pitcher in Paul Skeens who will be a Cy Young contender unless something horribly goes wrong. And they've once more decided to not spend money and not build a team around him, and the team's going to suck like they always suck. So the only thing that you have to sort of encourage the goodwill for the Pirates are, one, this particular player, and I think another pitcher, Jones, that's young, seeing how well they as individuals do. Secondly, PNC Park's beautiful. And third, you have sort of the nostalgia and history of the Pittsburgh Pirates. You know, the We Are Family 70s Pirates, Roberto Clemente, Willie Starger, Dave Parker, So why would you screw up the PR of one of those three things, which is sort of the nostalgia of the Pirates? And Clemente's probably the biggest one of that. So, yeah. Well, Grid, there's no debate tonight because it's next Thursday, not this Thursday, and I screwed up the dates. If you want to hear me scream curse words, you can go back to the beginning of this video and find the moment I realize. Yeah, I agree, Justin Mike. I don't know that they'll trade Skeens or if they'll probably trade him, but there's just a solid chance that they'll just leave his contract run out and he'll refuse to accept an extension, which he certainly should. And his next contract's going to be with the Dodgers, Yankees, or a big market team for huge money. Certainly the Pirates won't be able to. The Luka trade is interesting. I have thoughts on the Luka trade. Let's talk about race, right? Let's talk about race. Well, I'll get you, Grid. If you want to debate, we can debate. Give me a second. Here's some. Why not, man? How about race relations? There's all this stories about this black kid that stabbed this white kid. So race is in the news. Let's talk about race. Okay. Luka, I think this has a lot to do with race. There is the conspiracy theory that the Mavericks want to move cities. And so when they have a contender, it's more difficult to do that. Luka Doncic is a fantastic player. I don't know what the jersey sales were, but I'm assuming he had one of the best jersey sales in Dallas, or I mean in the country or in the world probably. And he's a top tier player. I believe MVP candidate this year. My uninformed, hardly ever watch NBA opinion is as follows. I don't think Dallas's sort of ownership as it's built now and their general manager wanted Luka to be the face of the team. I think they want a black guy. That's what I think. And that might make me a racist, but that's honestly what I think. And I don't blame this. There's this weird thing that occurs with race where it's like, we're pretended that we're not supposed to have an affinity for our own race, and that's stupid. That's really dumb. Now, sometimes it doesn't matter. Like, who's your favorite insert? Basketball player, actor, whatever, comic book character. Who cares, right? What's the stakes of that? But like, let's say politics. Should you vote for someone because they are a particular skin color? It's probably a dumb thing to do. But then again, people choose all sorts of dumb reasons to vote for someone. Should you vote for someone because they're a woman? Should you vote for someone because of their religion? Right? If you're Catholic and someone's running who's Catholic, but you disagree with them politically, but you're like, hey, they're Catholic, should you vote for them? I think that's dumb, but you're also not living in reality if you don't notice sort of how that has importance to people. So, for example, in 2008, when Obama won, I understood how that would make many black people feel amazing. And I don't begrudge that at all. I'm perfectly fine with that. Corey Barton's for $2. Thanks so much, man. It says Douglas Murray really embarrassed himself. That's what I'm reading. I'll have to check it out for myself. So what happens is you end up with a situation where like people have to feel ashamed because of the way our society is about saying something as simple. I like that boxer because he's white. I like that MMA fighter because he's black. And that's stupid. You have every right, and that does not make you a bad person whatsoever. At all. It doesn't. A lot of people like the NBA that were white because of Larry Bird. That's perfectly fine. A lot of people didn't like Larry Bird being as good as he was because he's white. That's okay too. They like Magic Johnson more. I remember there was this running back for the Cleveland Browns years ago, Peyton Hillis. Remember he had this one like standout year and he's a white dude and people were like, damn. Now it's cornerback in the NFL. There's like 2 white cornerbacks drafted. It was the first in like 20 years, you know? Or how about when you started to have like these generational talents that were black quarterbacks? Like I remember back in the day, one of my favorite quarterbacks was Steve McNair, happened to be black. But even before then, you had like Randall Cunningham, Warren Moon, um, and then Michael Vick. Obviously, he was having a pretty good run at one point. Um, and now you see, I'm not sure Patrick Mahomes' ethnicity is he 100% black, partially black? I don't know. And then, of course, you have Lamar Jackson, a lot of great. But there was, when that started, like, it was rare that you had a really top of the line black quarterback. The dude from the Redskins back in the day that won the Super Bowl, he's very good. He happened to be black. But that's cool. I don't mind black people being like, oh, that's something that is breaking sort of a normal thing, and it's cool. So, anyways, back to Luka. I think that the culture that the ownership of the Mavericks was trying to foster was more than just who's putting up the best points. We want someone to be a face of the franchise, and we have an image in our head what we want that to be. And we don't want it to be Luka. And I think it's a generationally huge screw up. I think that you're seeing the fan base turn. I think not only was Luka good for the team, but I think he was liked outside of that. I don't think that this was a guy that was putting up the numbers that he is, but that people were like, we personally don't like him. We find him annoying. We can't relate to him because he's from a foreign country. I don't think it was anything like that. And I mean, what a screw up. Everyone involved should end up fired. I mean, for me, it's just. But there's the NBA. I mean, listen, you're kidding yourself if you don't recognize that it's a. Do I want to debate Jola tonight? I don't know who Jola is, but sure. Particularly if they're a lefty. Yeah, and that's what I'm hearing, Justin. Like, there's more to it. Like, it's something to do with these casino deals and stuff like that. That may be. They just don't care about putting a winning product and whatever. Well, Grid could call in, but me and Grid agree on most things, so I don't know how interesting the debate would be. Who's this Jola guy or lady? I'll debate him. Anyways, so that's my feeling. But like the race is like even amongst that, like the NBA is a black league, and like look, there's cultural things, right? Like I was talking to my wife about this today. Like Allen Iverson, when he's coming up, he like had this big incident where he got in this brawl at his local high school, and it was like he was considered kind of like sort of gangster. As Iverson's MO, right? And that attracted a lot of people to him. Like, that wasn't really like Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, obviously a black man, but he doesn't come across as like, oh shit, this is some dude that was playing street ball and, there's a dude that dominated at North Carolina and came into the league and it's just like, he's a maniac. Michael Jordan's a maniac. He's like a crazy madman, intense, competitive dude. But he doesn't come across as like gangster. Now you have, what's his name, like Ja Morant or whatever. He kind of has that image. Getting in trouble for like social media videos, waving around guns, getting in trouble for shooting, acting like he has guns and blah, blah, blah. And And certain characters fit certain sort of clientele, certain people that are like, yeah, that's what I like. And so I don't know, like when you have people like Jokic and Luka that are really tearing it up in the NBA, I think that rankles some feathers in a similar way that Caitlin Clark in the WNBA does. What should I come to? It says Rob should totally come to that. What am I missing? Oh, thanks, Raceland. Appreciate. Did you send him my Discord name or my Discord channel? Just curious. So I could keep a lookout if he messages me. Well, I put the link. Grid has some news to ask me about that sign. What was the thing people were asking me to come to? I missed it. Live caller in the waiting room. On Discord? Oh, I use StreamYards now, but that's fine. I'll keep my eye on Discord. If someone wants to call in through Discord, that's fine. But it's the quality is always going to be better if someone just calls in through the StreamYard. The audio quality will be better. All right, as we're going further with race, as we're waiting for whoever's calling in, whoever's in, yeah, this stabbing incident. Listen, it's always hard when you don't know the full details of what happened to make a definitive judgment. But it sounds like, based on the facts that I've seen that have been released, that this the white kid at the track meet that was stabbed to death and died in his brother's arms. There's so much to the story because there's that, and then there's the reaction of the father. How's my coworker doing? It is not my coworker; it's a client, and I'm not sure. A little better in the immediacy, but it seems to be more long-term problems. How do I feel about the death penalty? I don't know. For a long time, I was against it because the only reason being that there's no coming back from it. If you mistakenly kill someone with the death penalty, there is no making that better. Whereas if you put someone in jail for life, even if it's 30 years later, you could correct that mistake to some degree. But I start to think that there are certain actions that if there's just no doubt of the guilt, that you're just like, yeah, death penalty. Like if it's on video that someone's committing the most heinous crime possible to a child, whatever, right? The problem is then that'll always lead to a slippery slope where people are like, well, this crime's obvious too, which I'm not exactly the biggest fan of, but I guess I don't have a real problem with it. Yeah, thank you, 2025. I appreciate that. It's a troubling situation, but I obviously can't talk about it much because medical privacy issues, but thank you. It means a lot. Yeah, still not seeing anyone in the Discord or the StreamYards. Anywho, nonetheless, there's the StreamYard link if anyone wants to call in again in the chat. Oh, there we go. Jola's in the waiting room. Let's do it. Now I got to figure this out, so give me a second. All right. What's up, Jola? Nice to meet you. Yeah, I know nothing about you. Someone said that you were streaming, and I was supposed to have a debate tonight, and I'm a meathead, and it's next Thursday, not this Thursday. So I was like, oh, I screwed the pooch on that one. So, real quick, would you do you mind calling in through my StreamYards? It'll just be the audio quality will be better. Is that all right? If I let me put the link to that and I'll send that to you DM. There you go. And it's just I'm a boomer, or I don't know what I am. A millennial, I think technically, but I know nothing about tech. So I can't figure out how to do the audio correctly through Discord and StreamYard simultaneously. So if you just join that StreamYard link, then I'll be good. So we'll see you in a second then. Thank you. I don't want to. What am I doing? I almost kicked this guy for what? Nothing. Idiot. Oh, he's muted on your end. That's all right. He's going to call him through StreamYard. He won't be muted. So it'll. Well, then we won't talk about the track. That I feel terrible. I can't make a definitive judgment, but there's certainly a lot of people that are looking at it just through a racial lens. I think I would see you if you're in the studio. In the studio, just need a link. Are you Jola, Unreasonable Man? Because we're going to talk to Jola. We've agreed to talk to him. So he'll be joining here shortly. No, I almost did. I almost clicked block on that guy. Accidentally, I was trying to move him out of that room. That would have been terrible. Then everyone would accuse me of, there we go. Now we got him. Oop. There we go.
I'm trying to get my microphone or my camera working. Real
okay. Quick. I'll put you in the back if you want me to wait.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. I just need.
Great. You got something real quick? I'm going to debate this guy. What's up?
Oh, I was going to debate that guy. I was going to debate you, actually.
Oh.
I was here to help you out, man. I didn't know if you had a debate for tonight. Well, apparently you thought you had a debate, but you didn't have a debate. And
right.
I'm like, I'm down. Let's make it happen.
Well, I thought we would agree on most things, so I'm looking for someone who I think would legitimately disagree with me in a lot, which someone recommended this person, Jola. So I'm going to debate him here this evening.
Okay, okay. All right.
That's the plan. We'll see how well it works. He'll probably crush me, and then I'll be really upset and rage quit.
Rage quit.
You know how that goes. All right, man. I'll talk to you soon, Grit. I'm going to bring him on. Thanks, man.
All right, man.
There we go, Jola. What's happening?
Nothing much. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm disappointed. I was hoping that you were like some ridiculously ugly troll, and then if you crush me in a debate, I could be like, "Look at you, though." Like, you know. So that's always a good win.
You know what? I actually do have commentary for the left. I think you might agree. Well, I guess just to start off, so I'm actually from. I know you're a Pennsylvania boy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I'm from like the coal region. If you know where that is, so like
up north, northern Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I was like an hour in proximity to like Centralia.
Okay. Yeah.
The 50-year fire that'll be burning for another 200 years.
Wasn't that like the Silent Hill movie? Isn't that where like the inspiration was for it being filmed?
I think so. I know some people that did like if you go on Snapchat or Instagram, they have like the little mini TV shows. I know people that actually went on the fake ghost shows and gave a fake testimony about how he was like in the cemetery at night in Centralia walking through and he saw like smoke come up and someone started chasing him. So they do a lot of the shooting around there because it is like a ghost town. I think there's 2 houses there now. But if anyone wants to look that up, Centralia, Pennsylvania, a really interesting story about an underground mine that
still on. Is it still on fire?
Yeah, it'll be on fire for like another 100 years or more because it's just enough oxygen for it to smoke and keep going, but not enough oxygen for it to like burn out. So
yeah, that's pretty crazy. But yeah, that's interesting. I'm from Clarion County. I don't know if I'm about an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes north, east of Pittsburgh. So in a rural area there. And I went to Clarion University in Clarion County there. So
so you're around Butler then, where
the 40 minutes. Happened. Yeah, right. I worked that day. I was going to go to that rally, but I was working, so it wasn't there. Probably a good thing. But yeah, I've been to the Butler Fairgrounds many times. I've seen that building. I actually have a friend whose job is working. Well, okay, let me rephrase that. I have a friend whose friend's job is working in that building, where the shooter was at. So,
yeah, definitely. But yeah, I'm definitely. I guess I'll say progressive. I hate political labels because it really is annoying. Because I'm not super crazy on, I guess you could say, guns or whatever. Especially being from Central PA, it was never really that much of an issue. I mean, I grew up around basically no people. So that topic never even came up. But I'm definitely for, I guess you could say, pro-worker policies, pro-union policies, higher taxes than what we have right now. Maybe some type of like minimum tax for the wealthy instead of our convoluted tax system right now. I'm definitely pro things like the CHIPS Act for manufacturing policy, against the tariffs that are happening right now. I'm against the SAVE Act that they just passed, which is a really fun one to talk about. But yeah, I'm generally in that field. I'd say somewhere between like I don't know, some boring guys like between Kyle Kalinske and David Pakman, if you guys know who they are.
David Pakman. I like David Pakman's debates now, and he just asks questions. So it's actually not a bad thing to do, that you learn to like make your argument in the form of a question.
Mhm.
Well, why would he do that? What do you think about this? Because it gives a perception that you're controlling the discussion, right? Like you think about it, like in your life, where have you been? What types of people are asking questions? Like a teacher, an attorney, right? Things of that nature. So it's like, I always find that interesting when I watch David Pakman. It's always an interesting device that he's employing there to control it. Yeah, I mean, we talk about whatever you like. I will say real quick, just anecdotal on the gun story. Like, it's interesting you say that. Everyone I know that owns guns, like there's, coming from my perspective, it's like, well, the Second Amendment's fighting government tyranny. And that's true. I know a lot of people that they would cite that as one of the big reasons they own gun. But easily the most common reason to own a gun where I live is because most of the people I know rely on shooting a deer for food for the winter. Everybody hunts. Well, it's less and less every year. But when I grew up and went to high school, it was nothing for people to have their pickup truck as they were seniors that would drive to school, and they'd have a gun rack in the back of their truck, and their gun would be there, and they'd bring their camo, and then you go out hunting after school. So it's like when I did debate in college, I'd run into a lot of people who lived their entire lives in cities, and it was like they couldn't believe it. They're like, what kind of things can you hunt and eat? And I was like, we used to go small game hunting. You'd shoot squirrel. You could have like up to 8 per time you went out. And they're like, you've eaten squirrel? But it's different worlds if you're not from an area like this, to realize like that's just part and parcel of the culture. I know Democrats that are like super progressive, pro-union people. They're hunting. Like it's around here. It is a big thing where even the Democrats are pro-gun, because to them it's not even this tyranny thing. It's a utility thing. It's like, yeah, we live in the woods. We have guns. So it is interesting. I think a lot of people don't realize that even if it's niche, there are people that have policies, believe in policies that seem to go against the grain because of the unique geographical area they're living in. And, another example could be right-wingers that are pro-union in very specific unions, such as unions that have to do with police, or unions that have to do with sort of energy workers, coal and things like that. So it's interesting when you find those little fractures in sort of political ideology where it's like, you get part of you says you should side with one. One thing you said there, though, you said you're pro-labor. Like, we could get to talking specifics and tariffs, whatever you want to talk about. But just to start the conversation, what do you think about so many unions starting to go for Trump? And it seems that like he is being seen by many unions and by many workers as the more pro-labor. Even the tariffs, a lot of industries are looking at, farming industry, steel industry, manufacturing, that it is now the Republicans, in particular MAGA, that's the pro-labor party.
I definitely think politics right now operates on a very cultural level. So very few decisions, even for labor movements, will be made purely from material or purely from economic policy. So I think, first off, the mentality in America where it's like, give me a chance to compete, make the playing field more level and will perform, definitely supersedes other attitudes versus, for example, like the CHIPS Act or other forms of the government subsidizing something. I feel they would rather say, have tariffs so we have a better chance to compete, rather than the government picking who's going to get government funds, picking winners and losers, picking which corporations get subsidies. So I think that's one of the big mentalities. And labor unions have always been pretty protectionist when it comes to outside, trade deals and especially China. And I think like even Bernie would talk, and he spoke on, I think Anderson Cooper, like last night, about how, he's pretty protectionist. He was against the normalization of relationships with China, at least how we constructed them in the 90s and 2000s. Mostly, I would definitely say under Bill Clinton, the most for sure. But yeah, I think it mostly connects culturally. And Trump also just talks about a lot of issues that culturally connect to union workers. And I'd say even for farmers too, because I don't think Trump's policies are very pro-farmer, especially with the way he needs to bail them out. He seems to not understand soybean farmers at all, or their issues with the reciprocal tariffs from China. But farmers also connect culturally to a more Christian, and when I say Christian, I mean independent Christian. So and this is one big issue that liberals don't have, or that liberals do have with Christianity as well. The Catholic Church and other churches that are more, I guess you could say, establishment focused and more leadership focused, like in terms of like what is the governmental structure of it, they are far different from the independent churches you'll see all throughout Indiana and Iowa and Ohio, and even some in Pennsylvania. Those like independent churches are going to be far more in farming communities and far more I guess you could say fundamentalist in a non-negative term. I mean, some areas may be negative, but more fundamentalist and more attached to the religion in a different way than I guess you could say like the normal what Christians will see as the Catholic Church and all that kind of stuff, like more than they would be.
I certainly think that there's truth to the fact that there's crossover. So cultural values sometimes could supersede traditional, what we thought that the parties represented. But I think that even if we set that aside, I think that there is a belief that sort of the NAFTA type policies that started under Bill Clinton and then policies that we've seen, basically, I would argue from both the Republican and Democrat Party, even if they supported, quote, unions, the Democratic Party, I think that a lot of workers, including many union workers in particular fields, feel that neither party has really had interest of the middle class working people. And the data does certainly back up that the middle class is eroding in this country, that wealth disparity, regardless of what president has been in his office, has been increasing. And one of the things I say all the time, we could argue about whether or not Trump's policies would be good for manufacturing, the middle class, labor, etc. But what's undoubtable is there are millions of people that find themselves in that category or were previously in that category and feel they've been left behind, that believe Trump's the best option for that. And I think the big reason for that is the bar is so low. I think that labor in this country feels that no one has represented them for like decades. They feel that someone at least talking to them and saying, hey, we love blue collar work. You're the backbone of the country, like Trump did, and going around and talking to these people. And even stories you hear of Trump before he was like into politics, where he'd be like, I'd be shooting the breeze with the construction workers and things like that. None of that matters in an objective scale of would your policies be good for labor, but certainly it seems to speak to people in labor that this guy at least looks at us as equals or as important and doesn't look at us as like people that like, haha, learn to code when you lose your jobs. We don't care. You're beneath us. We're academics. We're in ivory towers. You're stupid people that are forced to work with your hands, and you should just shut up and accept your place and your dwindling status in this country. So I think for those reasons, yeah, you're certainly right that there's these cultural, like Christianity, other cultural values, but I think that the bar is so low. And I think this is an area that I could reach across with people that are more progressive, maybe of a Bernie Sanders-esque vibe, where it's like, when they talk about the disenfranchised American worker, I agree. I may disagree on what the solutions will be to help them, but I don't think that either political party prior to Bernie or Trump had anyone that was serious at the national contention level for president that really spoke to the working class. And as a result, we've seen the promises that were given post-NAFTA and China entering the WTO were lies or they were failures. We have not seen robust growth for people that used to have these great manufacturing jobs. We've seen them slip into a lower and lower class, and increasingly the middle class becoming a dream that's unreachable, particularly from working class young people now, which many, even owning a home, seems impossible. As such, that's why I'm sort of in favor of at least Trump trying something, because I think had Kamala won, it would have been a status quo of what Joe Biden was doing and what Obama did previously and what George W. Bush did, which would have just been to continue to drive up the debt, continue to print money, continue to have inflation, and for manufacturing that we would rely on for many things in this country, like steel manufacturing or medicine manufacturing, to go to places that are geopolitical rivals. And inevitably, if nothing changes, the United States will falter not only from its top spot in the world, but instead of becoming a multipolar world, we'll quickly find ourselves in the hands of our adversary, like we saw with COVID with China, where all of a sudden we're reliant on China for PPE, we're reliant on China for simple pharmaceuticals to treat things like colds. Hell, we're reliant on China for ammunition manufacturing and steel manufacturing that would be necessary if needed to fight a hot war with them. So I think even if you disagree, and I don't know that Trump's policy will be a success or not, but at least it's a radical departure from the status quo, which needs to happen. Because if we continue down this path, the American worker's screwed.
Well, what I would say about Democrats, and this is another cultural thing, but most Democrats that are in leadership are from New York or California. You know, all the TikTok boys are from California or New York. The Pod Save America guys are from like Massachusetts or New York or California. They're all from those like 3 states, and they really don't know how to connect. And when Biden says learn how to code, the response probably should be, there's really nice plants in West Virginia now. There really are like battery plants, and if we want to build or make semiconductors here, or do more precious metals, or whatever we can move to America with the CHIPS Act, it should be, we're going to replace this with this. We have a lot of coal mines, a lot of sinkholes that go down. If you drop a rock down, it'll take 20 seconds before you hear a bump, down the sinkhole from the mines. We have all this polluted water. We can replace these old torn down mine shafts with these companies that are in West Virginia. And my thing with trade deals, if we're already in this position, the big thing is our country is getting richer. America is rich. So acting like, these other countries are screwing us off. The other countries are not screwing us off. If anything, we screwed other countries off to get to where we are. But if we have this wealth and people are mad about it, the issue is not really, the practice. It's who has all the wealth, who has all the money. And if you have this machine of global trade being so productive and efficient, I would say if we're moving manufacturing back, then use that wealth, use our military and our influence that we have as the world reserve currency, use all that power to first build the factories we need, to build that manufacturing here, use it to subsidize companies here that'll be taking a loss in order to fund these changes. And I think that'd be an effective strategy. But like these tariffs right now, China's eating right now. China's getting deals with Europe they never thought would be possible, dropping tariffs for EVs and everything. China's gonna be making. China definitely right now is emboldening and strengthening their relationships with all these countries we don't want them to be connected to. We're doing it through terrible policy. They're saying they're going to organize a trade deal with 50 million countries in like a week, after it took them like 2 years for Canada and Mexico. With the USMCA, which I think most of us would agree is it was a decent way to build on NAFTA. But it's just totally, everything they're saying right now makes 0 sense. It's not tethered in reality. The numbers are insane. No company's going to invest in America when the tariffs are changing constantly. And it's also the biggest tax increase in pretty much American history, but definitely in the past like 80 years for working class people. It's the biggest tax increase. And it's being done through central planning, like Maoism or communism, with the president just going, taxes up, taxes down. And the president should not be doing or leveraging taxes in that way. And I also don't want working class people to pay for this initiative. Like I said, the rich people benefit from the trade deals. The rich people got tons of money from the trade deals. They should pay for our way out of it, not the working class people. The working class people should not pay for our way out of the trade deals.
But they're not going to, right? Like, so right now what you're seeing, the reaction to the stock market, it's basically, although it is true that the stock market, I think people are insane that you see that are Trump supporters like, burn it all down. I know people that are invested in the stock market, so leave it collapse. It's not that simple. If the stock market collapses, there'll be pain suffered for everyone. Like that's
retirement.
I don't think I need to explain that to you. Like we would agree on that, I think. Now, certainly it will disproportionately hurt people that own more stocks, which disproportionately is the top 10%. In fact, even the top 1%. So in effect, the people right now in the immediacy that are affecting the brunt will be people that are in that top percent. The problem is, even any solution that you could come up with that anyone who's seriously, I'll start with this. How about this? Can you name me the national level politician that has suggested a plan that you think would be good to affect this wealth disparity and the hollowing out of the middle class in our country?
Well, I would say the CHIPS Act is the best example of a policy that was bipartisan, and the manufacturing increase in America for total manufacturing spending peaked under the last month of Biden. It's now declining for the first time in 4 years. But it's declining now under Trump.
First off, the CHIPS Act, I haven't done my research on this recently, but when the CHIPS Act passed and like the following year after that, many of the factories that we told came here and were investing were actually factories that were already planned, and you had plans to come before that. Now, there have been a few since then that have agreed to come about, but I think at most it's like 50,000 manufacturing jobs that they're trying to claim that perhaps, and that's a very generous number. The idea, like the jobs that were being created under the Biden administration were predominantly government jobs and jobs that were going to people that were foreign born. And most of these numbers are manipulated anyways. But even if you accept the numbers, real wage growth was stagnant under the Biden administration, absolutely stagnant. So if I ask you like, well, can you name me the national politicians that had policies that were pro-worker? If it was so good, why did workers, in fact, union members, for the first time in a long time, start to break towards Trump? The truth is because the data is manipulated and the economy wasn't the rosy outlook that we were told. The truth is the Biden administration, and by extension Kamala Harris, weren't going to do anything that would change the fortunes. And in addition to that, any problems you have against free marketism with tariffs, it seems that massive subsidies start to fall into very similar problems. And the other thing I'll say real quick, when it comes to market manipulation, etc., I'm sort of with you. I think that tariffs as a negotiating strategy isn't a bad thing, right? But I don't want to see them implanted long term. I would rather see more of a free trade type system. I think there are other things we could do, like deregulation, etc., that will make the United States more favorable. However, what I will say is that you can't really, if Europe decides, well, we're going to go with China instead of the United States because we find China unpredictable, China's response is to devalue their currency. They constantly do this sort of manipulation. So if the idea is, well, we're going to go with China because they're more stable, I don't think that'll be the case. I think what you're likely to find, and I could be wrong, I don't have a lot of confidence in this. I think that because anytime you're trying to do a radical shakeup of the status quo, the people that are on the top of the status quo, which are the wealthiest, not just in the United States, but in the world, are going to have disproportional power because of our massive government system, which is another reason to have a smaller government instead of a bigger one. And they're going to wield that power to try to make sure that the status quo doesn't radically change. And so I think anytime you have a shakeup of that, whether it be this or if it was a Bernie Sanders-esque plan that's like, we're going to massively tax the rich, you would see the stock market declining in that world as well. So we'll see how this plays out. But my guess is that you'll see European countries will come to a negotiating table with the United States. I don't know that the deals would be as favorable as Trump would have his supporters believing, but I don't think that it'll be a mass exodus to China. If anything, the mass exodus to China probably has more to do with the fact that we've had a disastrous war in Ukraine that we've propped up. Now even the New York Times is admitting that the United States was proffering the entire time, even though Biden's administration lied about it, which drove the BRICS Union and drove all of these, quote, hostile countries into embracing China. And if anything, that gives them the leverage necessary to continue to do so in the future.
So, I should have wrote down a couple points, but when it comes to the middle class in America, the worst thing you can do is kill anything that starts with Medicaid or Medicare, or just attack the stability of Social Security and the ability for Social Security and the VA to serve people. Those are huge stimulus to the economy, and it serves people very well. In rural areas, rural hospitals will shut down like crazy if they make any cuts to Medicaid and Medicare. And I know the budget framework talks about 80 billion over a certain amount of time, but Republicans wanting to cut that spending at the same time doing tariffs. We can't go away from the fact that these tariffs are a tax on the working class in America. We're cutting taxes for the wealthy and we're taxing working people instead. We're giving a 10% across the board tariff on every country, and 25% on Canada and Mexico still, and then 145%, I think it is now. It keeps going up every day on China. And the fact is, if our president is going to, if we're not going to have laws in America, if we're not going to have anti-corruption measures in America, if the president is going to be switching tariff policy like this so rapidly and attacking Canada and Mexico, which is vital to our national security to be friends with them if we do get into a war with China, by chance, and also attacking Europe, saying the EU was formed to screw over America. That's the worst way possible for American stability to be in any solid position. And I agree, like the fact so many countries will go more towards China is a bad thing, but I think it speaks even worse to where America is viewed right now in the global system. And these tariffs are going to end manufacturing jobs. It's going to shut down factories. Google shutting down, or Microsoft is, I think Microsoft or Google, they announced 2 of their data centers they're going to build are going to be canceled. In Erie, that recycling plant is now canceled. That was going to be, I think it was like $300 million recycling plant. That was going to provide a decent number of jobs as well. So this manufacturing is going to be shut down because the input costs into our country is going to be so increased by these tariffs. There's so many small businesses reeling right now. That 10% can be make it or break it for small businesses. And we saw during COVID, we saw during the financial crisis in 2008, we saw during every financial crisis, pretty much except the Great Depression, because we had to restructure our system to tax the wealthy a lot more. Every time there's a financial crisis, you said that Wall Street suffers. Wall Street always looks like they suffer first. But what happens is there's a huge market crash. Then they lay everyone off. Everyone loses their jobs. Everyone loses their housing. And then after the market crash, the wealthy become even wealthier. The biggest jumps in the wealth of the top 1% came in 2008 and 2020. Anyone can look up the amount of wealth the top 1% gained in 2020. Although we said small businesses were going to suffer and Wall Street is going to suffer with the stock market, just like it is now. Whenever the economy fragments, they have enough money to withstand it. They can just move assets around, let small businesses die, and then pick up the pieces and get even stronger.
Well, the problem is everything you said would also be true under the plan that you're suggesting. So the people that say, well, you know what the solution is? Tax the billionaires more. That also will be a tax on the working class. Tariffs isn't a direct tax. It is basically a consumer level tax because what happens is the manufacturers of the goods will pass that on to the actual consumers. Now, the truth is it's not a one-to-one thing. For example, a 10% tariff won't directly lead to a 10% increase in a product's price. What's likely to happen is the foreign producers that will be the countries that are tariffed will eat a small percentage of that, and then the producers in the United States that are reliant on those products will also probably eat a small percentage. So let's say it was each 1%, then that causes an 8% increase in the product in the United States. Not good for the United States consumer, I get that. But two things. One, a radical increase on tax on the wealthy also won't be eaten by the wealthy. You've just given the rationale, no matter what's ever done, the rich will come out on top. So if we have lockdowns for COVID, it'll always end up benefiting the rich, which is exactly what happened, which the people that you support, like Joe Biden, etc., were vehemently in favor of that policy.
Hell
in
yeah.
fact, right. You were for that? You were for lockdowns?
And so was Donald Trump. So was Donald Trump.
Now, Donald Trump, to his great shame, and one of the biggest criticisms of him was he didn't, as president, order lockdowns, but he seemed to pay lip service to them. But regardless of what you think about it, the Democrats certainly were massively more in favor of lockdowns. And by the time Trump was ending his first term, were criticizing him for not embracing lockdowns and saying that his policies and his signaling was going to be a disaster for this country. In fact, they took states that had great governors like Ron DeSantis, who actually I would have chosen before Trump. They looked at that and said that it was going to be the forever purge and that there were going to be bodies piling up in the street in Florida. I just want to be clear before we get further in this economic discussion. You favored lockdowns.
For some duration, when conservatives talk like we couldn't leave our houses or anything, I mean, all of us were at the parks, we were having a good old time outside, and the hospitals were filled up in much of the country. It's hard to make policy at every individual level in local markets, but nurses and doctors were suffering during this period, and for a few months for sure. And there was an actual reason for that crash. There was an actual reason for that crash, by the way. This crash right now is just
no. There was a reason for that crash because the policies that people had that were disastrous, that didn't protect our health, instead intentionally sabotaged our economy, which we're still feeling the ramifications of today. That was
not having a bolstered healthcare system really hurt America, but also just like in general, like the hospitals were filled up. If you got into a car crash and did not have COVID, your care was compromised. Like there were other issues with the lockdown.
So when you say the hospitals are filled up, in what way? Are you saying that like the emergency room beds were filled up? Or are you saying the ICU beds were filled up?
Yeah, there were doctors committing suicide because their hospitals were filled up and they were seeing patients die so rapidly. And then a car crash victim would come in and get COVID in the doctor. Like this all piled on top of each other. Those few months during the pandemic were pretty shitty. They were pretty bad. And I think we forget that. But I'm just saying, like when it comes to that crash, there was an actual fundamental reason for doing that with the limitations of our healthcare system. Right now, the economic issues that are going to come down on small businesses here, if he keeps these tariffs on, these 10% tariffs, and the 145% tariffs or whatever. Although China's going to ship through Vietnam probably, regardless. But if he keeps those, and it's not going to be for saving lives or any theory that has ever worked in human history. It's just going to be because Trump is, failed to study, economics.
Depending on the numbers you use, many of the official studies actually show that ICU bed usage throughout much of COVID was lower than on average. And for every story you talk about, a doctor committed suicide because of the work burden they were having, let me tell you an anecdotal story. So in Clarion County and in Jefferson County, which are the two counties that one I live in and one that's closest to me, I think it was the Butler Health Network was some of these hospitals. They all went through the same network. They, during the pandemic, ended up laying off some 500 healthcare workers and nurses. You want to know why? Because the hospitals were empty. Because in places like Clarion and Jefferson, at one point, Jefferson County had a total of 0 cases of COVID up until that point. Now, my brother had horrible seizures where he would have grand mal seizures to the point where he shattered both of his collarbones at points. At one point, he has a seizure, and my mom drives him out to Jefferson County, assumes he'll be there all night as he always was. She pulls in, the hospital's completely empty. She goes in with my brother. They tell her she can't come in because of COVID, even though there's been 0 cases at that point in Jefferson County. Goes into the hospital. To her chagrin, within 2 hours, they released him because they were worried that at any moment there could be a significant rush and every hospital bed could fill up. And so therefore they had to send him home. He had a grand mal seizure on the 20-minute drive back home. As he was choking on the seatbelt, my mom tried to release him from the seatbelt. He fell out of the car on the side of the highway and broke his collarbone again. He was supposed to have brain surgery that was delayed because people's health was significantly impacted because of the fear of COVID, which ended up in most of the time during COVID, ICU beds weren't at the capacity of 100%, 95% that people are talking about. They ended up getting rid of a bunch of elective surgeries and things like that. But when we say elective, we're not talking like liposuction. We're talking about things like that, like brain surgery. So he had to have that put off for over a year. There's tons of people that had disparate health outcomes because they were afraid to go to the hospital or because they couldn't go to the hospital. And there had hospitals where they were laying off healthcare workers because there was no profitability because no one was showing up. The truth is, lockdowns did nothing whatsoever to help our health.
That's not true at all.
Okay, so
hospital mortality in the emergency room. So I actually have a study from NIH about and I said the non-ICU patients, if you get into a car crash, for example, or if you have cancer or whatever, a non-COVID ICU patients had a 17% increase in mortality odds during the second wave of COVID, and 15% higher mortality odd in the ICU versus the first wave of COVID.
But why?
So like this hadn't because the hospital resources were strained, not everywhere. So not everywhere in the world is happening exactly at once.
Wait.
If you want to do a city by city policy, you could.
It wasn't just they were strained. It was also that they were laying people off because many of the hospitals weren't strained, so there was less healthcare workers. And in addition to that, the hospitals were all singularly focused on COVID. And so if you have everyone strapped down, constantly ready to go on COVID, and because of that, you're not prepared for someone coming in with a motorcycle wreck, yeah, I guess their mortality go up. Nonetheless, that's a moving the goalpost. That doesn't answer the point that I was making, that the lockdowns didn't help us. Right? Just saying.
They help capacity. They did help capacity not be as overwhelmed.
Okay, so give me an example. So then how would we compare this? How would we find out if lockdown significantly saved lives? What are some of the ways that we would seek to test
the study I just brought up where you can see that more people were dying during it? You're saying it's just because they were focused on COVID. That is true, they were focused on COVID, but they also, they have people there.
That study doesn't prove what
it depends on the area.
That study doesn't prove what you're saying.
Area.
That study does not prove that lockdowns led to better health outcomes. So how would we seek to test that?
Honestly, I'd rather talk about the 10% tax on all Americans. I don't really want to talk about COVID.
This is interesting. One of the ways we would seek to test
No, because I fell into one of your traps. It's all about social issues. It's all about social issues. Let's get back to actual facts.
No, wait a second.
It's about social issues. I said the word COVID. I said the word COVID.
No, wait. You're talking about managerial economies, and you talked about how COVID was something that significantly affected our economy. One of the arguments I have is the very people that are talking about the problem with Trump trying to manage our economy through tariffs actually managed it in a far more significant way for no benefit whatsoever for lockdowns. And now you're like, once you realize that you're not going to be able to defend that position, a position that you said you agreed with, that you were for lockdowns, now you want to be like, no, I want to go back to criticizing the tariff.
I really don't want to defend it because I could bring up numbers all day, but I'd rather just make up a story about the current economy and small businesses dying because I could bring up masks working and you'll be like, no, masks never worked at all for anything.
What does that have to do with what does that have to do with what we're talking about? Masks.
Because I could bring up any fact on this situation here, and I can't pin you down on it because I haven't spent years debating COVID. So I'd rather just go to the economic issues I do understand. I'll admit it right now. I fell into the COVID trap. I'd rather not talk about COVID.
I just asked you hypothetically how we would determine whether or not a medical policy was effective or not.
Because you can see the refrigerator trucks in different cities. You can see that the capacities are overwhelmed. You can see the higher suicidality rate from doctors. To see the systems are overwhelmed.
I'll give the answer, and you tell me if you find this sufficient. We would take places that did significant lockdowns, and we would compare them to places that didn't do significant lockdowns.
No, because you have to test for area, geographics. You have to test for a multitude of factors. Then, because in cities you live everyone next to each other. So in Florida, everyone has their fancy retirement home and perfect medical service because they're all rich down there because they're retiring down there. That could be a different circumstance than if you're in New York City, you need to interact with 50 million people every day. So there's a bunch of different factors. I'd rather not get into it because it's too complicated for the conservative mind to comprehend.
So then your argument would be we can never compare two places because there are variables. So in which way would you test it? And I'll tell you the answer.
I'm saying for this conversation, we would need to actually get a debate ready for it, and both of us actually look through information for this because right now we're just throwing back anecdotes.
We did look through I've looked through the information. I'm surprised as someone who would you agree that the lockdowns massively impacted our economy in a negative way?
Yeah, but I think that's not at all the key feature of the COVID lockdowns.
And would you also agree that lockdowns were a severe imposition on sort of the rights of people in this country?
Which lockdowns were?
In general, the lockdowns that we saw.
And what lockdowns were there?
Okay, let's talk about in Pennsylvania. You live in Pennsylvania, right? You remember the vaunted red, yellow, green system?
I remember having a law passed so we can get alcohol delivered or have alcohol to take out.
So for example, Governor Wolf at the time said that counties would be approached by a county by county system. If you were red, I think in those counties you could only have gatherings of 10 people. Non-essential businesses were closed, so restaurants, bars, things of that nature. Once that progressed to yellow, some of those places were allowed open, but there were time frames that they were allowed. So for example, I think they were only allowed to open maybe 11 a.m. if I remember. The capacity was severely limited. There had to be a certain amount of food sales that were going with any alcohol sales. Still, certain businesses weren't allowed to be open, etc. And then with green, it was back to normal. It's interesting how the people that champion these sorts of policies forget that they occurred.
That now. It's extremely easy to say that now.
But I was saying
you did not have to make decisions. I'm just saying you never had to make decisions in this situation. You weren't there at the time. We could use it in 2025.
What evidence?
And use it with hindsight. But I'm just
saying,
how old are you?
And just the
evidence,
the evidence.
Adult, yes, I am.
You're
25.
over like 20. So
the evidence that you would need for that is something we know now. But when this crisis was rolling out, we did not have all this information. We did not have any preventative measures like vaccines. We did not have this out yet when these things were being rolled out. If you want to make the argument that once vaccines were out, that they should have toned it down quicker, then I could agree with that. But when we're talking about the initial lockdowns, when we were still finding out information, I think it's just like a 5-year-old logic to say we know better now. Of course, we know better now.
Okay, first off, I knew better then. Right. Secondly, if
Trump
because
you make predictions off of no evidence.
No, that's not true. I had plenty of evidence, but we'll get into this in a second.
There's a reason America had higher death rates than every developed country.
If Trump came out tomorrow and said, because of massive violence that we're seeing in inner cities, we're embracing lockdowns across this country, non-essential businesses will close, et cetera, would you have a problem with that?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly why. Like COVID, for example, became the #1 cause of death in America for like 4 months, and no one even cares about it. It became the #1 cause of death in America, above heart disease, and the numbers remain stable for those as well. And like that's a huge difference in what was happening before COVID versus now. There's no massive crime wave you could find from immigration when Trump is calling it a national emergency because he is just having his permanent brain damage. I think he fell more times than Biden did with how he's talking. But like when we're talking about the actual differences now that would cause a national emergency, there's nothing you can find in any crime data anywhere.
What's the #1 cause of death for people? What's the #1 cause of death of people under 18?
Playing video games.
I don't believe you.
It makes you violent to play video games. Trump said
that.
Okay,
so then that would be a causality that the end result would be.
I'm following Trump. I'm also following Trump's red flag laws where he thinks
I'm asking you, like, if you don't want to answer the question because you don't think that it works for you to just have an honest conversation.
I am answering the question.
So your serious answer to the #1 cause of death for young people in this country is video games.
Because they play video games and get violent.
Okay, so then, but you said the cause of death is video games.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's debate that. Can you show me your proof? I'd like to see the study that says that.
I know someone that played a video game once and they did a crime. It was really bad.
It sounds to me like you're unserious about the conversation because you're not in a defensible position. That's what it sounds like. And it sounds like I would do a better job of sort of arguing your position because I'm approaching it in a serious way as opposed to you. So, for example, the reason you would have a problem, Trump could easily say, well, the #1 cause of death is gun violence for people under the age of 18, and therefore we're going to have lockdowns in these inner cities because of gun violence until we get those numbers down. Now, you would be against that, and the reason you would be against it is you would say, even if those numbers that he's citing are accurate, there is no proof that these lockdowns would significantly curb that violence, or even if it would, there's no proof that something that egregious that will harm people's rights, harm economic futures, harm people's mental health in other ways.
We did have Italy. We already knew what was going to happen with the COVID.
Nonetheless, I'll finish my
Italy
point.
wishes they had lockdowns. Italy wishes they had the ability to see what we saw.
There is no evidence that those lockdowns.
Oh, there was evidence. There was evidence. Oh, by the way, if there was gun violence enough to fill up every ER in America to where you can't have anyone in there, 100%, I would be okay with.
So now your claim is every ER in America was filled up because of COVID.
Yes, every ER.
That's a lie. Remember when we heard claims like this were made in New York City and we sent that ship there and then it sat there empty because it turns out the boisterous claims were a lie? As even the governor has now admitted that it was a huge mistake to do these lockdowns. But you're still defending them. I like that. Now, the point that I was trying to make is, would we not agree that before we violate people's right to assembly, right to go out in public lands, etc., that we should have a damn good reason for doing so? Not just our feels, correct?
I think that Donald Trump should stop sending immigrants to foreign gulags.
Yeah, right. You can't defend the position. When we talk about foreign gulags, it'll be the same thing. When we start, if I move on to the next topic because you're getting blown on here, once you get blown on there, you'll say, I want to talk about something different.
I was talking about tariffs. You moved on to COVID. I want to talk about tariffs.
No, you were talking about COVID. You specifically cited it as an example of a control economy.
I said there was an economic crash, and we had a crash because of a situation that's happening in the world. So, like, for example, Biden had another recession, a mini recession when Russia invaded Ukraine, but that was actually caused by something other than the president's stupidity.
COVID did not cause the recession. The reaction to COVID caused the recession.
Wow, that's so cool. And yeah, okay.
Right. A reaction that it was not justified. People like you probably, if I go through
Yes.
your social media, was saying that Florida was going to be a hellscape because they weren't doing lockdowns. Then when it turned out that that wasn't true and they basically did the exact same as New York, which was one of the harshest lockdowns, you'll say, whatever, it doesn't matter because of variables.
No, it's hard to talk about this because
no
you don't care
evidence.
much. So, like, if I say, for example, like a couple 100,000 more people died, you don't really care that much because I
That's
can't
not
really show
true.
you a video. Hey, you do, because you'll probably go on a rampage about like subways in New York being dangerous. And then if I tell you like numbers about 1 million people dying from COVID, you won't care because it's not something that's a big bang because you react to more feelings and emotions.
At all. That's
It
not
is
true
true.
at all.
It is true. Do you think New York subways are dangerous?
Sure. And
okay,
have I
and
ever
that's
talked about
that's a dumbass opinion. But I want to make you feel safe, so you have to talk about it in a way that sounds better.
Thousands and thousands of hours that I've streamed on here, how many seconds do you think I've devoted to New York subways?
All of them.
How about none? Now, once more, you prove that you're an unserious person. The point that I'm trying to make is, before you have radical policies that infringe on people's rights, you have to think through and answer significant questions, such as, is this policy the best policy forward? How many lives will be affected if we don't do this policy? How many lives will be saved by this policy? Are there other possibilities you could have? How many lives will be harmed and in what ways by doing this policy? And when does the government have the right to restrict people's rights, economy, etc., based on sort of how big of a threat they think? Like, for me, did you favor the Patriot Act?
I wasn't alive.
No, you were. You're 25, right?
Well, right now I'm really against them doing mass surveillance to scan faces to find which immigrants are anti-Israel.
Okay, so you would say that you were against the Patriot Act as you now understand it.
I'm with the abuse of the Patriot Act for sure. A minor version of it, maybe.
Okay, so what version? The 9/11 occurs. There's terrorist attacks. Basically, the Patriot Act, the big part of it that I think we'd both be talking about is violating people's Fourth Amendment rights to privacy. Like, they were doing shit like going into mosques that never did anything wrong. And we're like, hey, well, Islam's scary, right? That shit's grotesque, in my opinion. I said so at the time, right? Obviously, you're younger than me, so I'm not asking you to have said it at that time. But the rationale for the Patriot Act was this really scary shit happened. It affected thousands of people and changed our way of life. And we're afraid that a more significant attack will occur, so therefore we're taking away your rights. And the correct response to that's like, well, wait a minute. There are significant questions to ask. When does the government have the right to take away the rights that are enshrined to us in the Bill of Rights? What is that? Why are they doing this? What is the data they're looking at? I'm not saying they have to get it. Well, exactly 17,000 people will die next year of terror, but they have to give us some idea of what they think will happen if they don't do it. They have to give us some idea of what the harms will be if they do this. Under COVID, all of that was skewed by people that said, what do you want grandma to die? And you're in Pennsylvania, and so you know that Tom Wolf told us that small businesses had to die because they were non-essential businesses. Meanwhile, he violated his own orders to go march with Black Lives Matter. He said if you had a problem with it, you wanted grandma to die, while simultaneously he ordered nursing homes to accept COVID patients, so grandma died because her new neighbor had COVID. And you supported the idea of lockdowns.
Wait, so how long did the lockdowns last? When did the final lockdown end in Pennsylvania?
My guess is that it went into late 2021, early 2022.
I'm seeing that the stay-at-home order was lifted in June 4th, 2020.
It wasn't just a
Governor
stay-at-home order, right? They had this yellow, red, green. Yes, the stay-at-home order was the most significant of it.
When were we transitioned to green then?
What a great question. When did we? Well, it was on a county-by-county level.
First PA, let's see. First PA counties went green, May 22nd. All other counties, let me see. All other counties moved to that phase by June.
I'm reading June 28th was maybe the last green.
So a 3 or 4 month period.
Yeah, what do you think shutting down the state economy for 3 or 4 months did?
Well, that was not the key feature of COVID at all when it comes to shutting down small businesses. It was more of an access to the loans and corruption of the loans for bigger companies that could abuse them. When it comes to small businesses, let me see closure rate.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The big government policies that you would favor, control economy, where we had the government say that embrace the lockdown strategy that you suggest and then give out these loans to pick winners and losers. It turns out that was abused. That's true. One of the biggest socialist policies in the history of our country led to rampant abuse and led to the devastation of small businesses.
That's not socialism. That's very basic neoliberalism. That's very centrist.
Well, it's certainly okay. It's not socialism in the effect that full-scale socialism would be government owning the means of production, but it's certainly closer. This is as silly of an argument as saying, "Well, the Scandinavian countries aren't socialist; they're capitalist."
I'm trying to see the actual closure rate for businesses, because the closure rate for 2021 was from 2021 to 2022. The closure rate was higher than it was from 2020 to 2021. So the closure rate happened after COVID, during the economic concerns after COVID and the global inflation. So it doesn't seem to be a direct result of the lockdowns. Let me see. What's this?
Also, we're not talking about 3 or 4 months, right? Like some of the restrictions for COVID started in like March of 2020 in Pennsylvania. So them being fully, the last county going green in June 2021, that's like over a year, right? That's a significant amount of time.
We're looking at, for a small business, it would be, your revenue coming in, what programs are there for support, and then what led to your issues reopening. It seems that the rising costs and shipping ports and supply chains mattered more than the shutdowns.
Why did supply chains have such a problem? Because we shut down not just the US economy, but the global economy.
And even with shutdowns, we still had the ICU numbers that we had. So if we had no shutdowns at all, the numbers
Give me the
were
ICU
presented.
numbers. What's the average? So we're talking about if the
like I said, we can come forward and right now I'm not used to talking to propagandists and people that care about political messaging.
There's nothing
so you
to
need
do
to
with
give me a little bit.
propaganda.
Give me a little bit here, because no, for this conversation, you should want both of us to be prepared to have an honest conversation. I already said that I'd want to look up more exact numbers. I brought the ICU numbers and the increase in deaths. If you want to keep on rambling on, you can, but we could get back to tariffs and talk about a more modern topic. I already think that when you talk about like certain buzzwords, conservatives get really emotional and start screaming. So I hope you can prove me wrong here. We can go back to tariffs. If we want to have a conversation about lockdowns, we can definitely relitigate that. But I haven't looked that up since like 2022. I haven't done my YouTube since 2021, so I'd have to go back to my other debates back then and see what the arguments were back then. So I mean, we could talk about it sometime. But you're asking me for some pretty deep statistics right now for a topic I don't really talk about that much.
So you call me a propagandist. You're the one who's calling me names. I don't think that I've raised my voice. You're the one who's being unserious saying video games and things like that. Showing that you yourself are the person that's engaging propaganda. I think that it would be incumbent on a person that is intentionally wishing to violate people's rights and to shut down the economy, that they should have to say, why am I doing that? What is the data that I'm looking at that suggests that's something we should do? And certainly post-talk should be interested in, oh my God, I just engaged in a policy that led to, or favored a policy that led to so much economic destruction, led to the destruction of children's education, led to the destruction of people's mental health, led to all of this stuff.
Other countries had similar issues with lockdowns or without lockdowns.
I understand the need to interrupt here, and I would want to do that too if I was advocating for.
Yeah, and now you're putting the conversation in narrative right now.
There we go.
That's what I'm saying. You're propagandizing.
I would do that as well if I was advocating for.
Yeah, okay, you're propagandizing again. You're putting us in a narrative. Okay.
Again,
now we can go back to the actual stats globally.
I'm not going to let you filibuster the point because you know that you're making an indefensible point. You're interrupting is what you're doing. So
you're saying global supply chains are because of Pennsylvania small businesses.
I'm going to finish my point. Come hell or high water. I sit here patiently and let you talk, even when you're attacking me and being unserious. You'll give me the same courtesy. So you can't defend the point. And what you're doing is you advocated for this authoritarian policy. You can't give us the reason why you advocated for it at the time, other than to say a lot of people were dying. And now you're like, well, I don't really care.
Yeah.
Now you're saying, well, I don't really know any of the data or the numbers. I never bothered to look into it.
I do know the numbers, but for you,
so
I need
you
to
know
walk
the ICU numbers. Go for it.
I need to walk you through it. I know that I gave you the ICU numbers for the amount of people that died that were non-ICU patients.
That has nothing to do with the ICU.
Or non-COVID patients. I mean, non-COVID patients going to ICU because they were overwhelmed. And the
what does that have to do with what we're talking about?
Because of the overwhelmed hospital systems. That's literally the exact thing we're talking about is the hospital systems being overwhelmed. That's literally the exact argument I'm making. And globally, we saw these issues globally. The global supply chains were not because of Pennsylvania businesses closing for 3 months. I agree it sucks, but sometimes as an adult, you go through shit. You have to do things that you don't like to come out better. You can disagree with the governmental policies for sure, but even the red states had shutdowns. They still violated rights. So do you think it was still justified when those red states did?
No.
Okay,
That's the
then
difference
you'd
between
be
me
a
and you.
radical
I'm
on
not.
this. Yeah,
Right,
you are a
that's the
radical.
difference
Yeah,
between.
you're more radical
It
than
has
Ron
nothing to do with.
DeSantis
It has
and
nothing
Donald
to do
Trump.
with.
Yeah,
It has
you
nothing
are
to do.
more
It
radical
has
than
nothing
yeah.
to do with radical.
We
What it has
disagree
to
with
do
them.
with that I'm a principled person and you're not. That you're
No, you are.
unserious
You're
about this,
You're
please.
Monday morning quarterbacking
I'm
it.
not Monday morning quarterback.
Yeah,
I have
you.
videos at the
That's the
time that we're
definition of
talking.
this.
I have videos at the time that we're talking about this. I said that if the government said that something like these lockdowns were necessary, then there were certain questions at the very minimum that they had to answer. For example, they should have to answer how bad do they think COVID will get? How many people will die? How many people do they think will get ill, et cetera, et cetera. Second, they should have to answer questions such as when does the government have the right, at what threshold do they think a problem could be before they could blatantly violate our First and Fourth Amendment rights and things like that. Third, I said they should have to articulate what they think the potential negative impacts of the policies. But why are you interrupting me? I don't understand.
Court cases on this because you said this already.
Why are you interrupting me?
Were there any court cases on lockdowns?
You could ask that question when I finish my point. I find the constant interruptions to be someone who's coming from a weak position because they know that they have to try to interrupt a person because if they're allowed to get their thoughts out, that you won't be able to defend it. So you could ask me after this if there were court cases. I'm going to finish my point. So third, they should have to ask what the negative repercussions of that should be. Fourth, they should have to answer if there's any alternative repercussions. Instead, what we got was a censorship of comments largely surrounding COVID, and we got people just shaming you, saying things like, what do you want grandma to die? Right. Meanwhile, the very people that were saying that were issuing policies where they were forcing COVID patients to go into nursing homes. The truth is, before you have, I'm not unwilling to say I'm not a complete ANCAP or anything like that. Of course, there are times when the government should be allowed to temporarily restrict our rights. I just think the government has to be transparent and give the information why. It turns out that restriction was a massive mistake. There is no evidence that it massively saved lives or that it was necessary. There is significant evidence that it harmed our economy, both nationally at the state level, and it benefited people at the wealthiest level. And similar policies that were occurring across the world actually made the problem worse across the world as well, including with supply chains. That's the problem. And you embrace that policy, an authoritarian policy. You don't have good evidence why you embraced it at the time. And now you're saying, well, I haven't really looked into it post-talk because it's not something
you
that
won't
I care
agree with
about
any of the
much.
stats. You won't care about the stats or the studies because you can't give evidence about something that did not happen. And conservatives want to see it right in front of your face or you won't believe it. Like I could say like, oh, that car is going to crash into a wall and there's a kid behind the wall. It's like, well, if there was no wall there, it would hit the kid. And you'll be like, it never hit the kid. Did the wall really stop it? It's like, yeah, the wall still stopped it. But all the if I bring up the Lancet or John Hopkins or NIH, it's all going to be the same thing. Like, oh, how can I trust those studies? That's why I wanted to move to Donald Trump being authoritarian and bringing the biggest tax increase to American people in American history. And also you talk about, you don't give a shit about the wealthy. You support Donald Trump, who's the most corporatist, pro-wealthy person in American history. He's the most corrupt president we've ever had when it comes to insider trading and crypto and everything.
Give me an example of Trump's authoritarianism.
Donald Trump signed his authoritarianism. Yeah. Right now, he is trying to take federal oversight of Columbia University over their students' free speech.
Okay, so the argument would be censoring their free speech would be authoritarian.
No, the argument is putting a private university under federal control.
Okay, what if they told Columbia University instead of that, he said no one's allowed to go to the university? Would that be worse?
It'd be just as bad, yeah.
You think it would be worse?
Just as bad.
It would be just as bad. So saying, hey, we'll take away funding is different than saying we're physically not allowing anyone on the premise. That's equally bad.
I think it's authoritarian either way. We could argue two dictators, but they're both authoritarian.
I won't disagree with you. You could say both things could be authoritarian, but there could be worse authoritarianism than others, correct?
Okay, I'm not saying he's literally Adolf Hitler, but he can't be Mao.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you're saying that. I didn't mention Hitler. I'm just saying it seems that like you seem to sometimes be arguing for the sake of arguing. It's like I think that it's easy to say, well, yeah, it would be a step further to say, oh, and we're shutting down the university.
Threatening law firms and getting pro bono legal work, and then saying that they're giving him a gift or whatever because he's threatening them legally to ban them from federal buildings, and going after someone that worked on the case against Fox News, the lawyers today. He literally signed executive orders today explicitly to tell the DOJ to go after like 2 individuals that were doing their legal job to say the 2020 election was certified correctly.
Okay, nonetheless, let's go back. I don't mind talking about this on the previous point that we were on. You can't admit that literally telling people they're not allowed to attend Columbia University and completely shut it down would be more authoritarian than saying we're going to take funding away?
Oh, if it was because you're going to bring back COVID back into it.
So what you're saying is you're unwilling to admit the truth because you think it'll benefit me argumentatively.
No, because it's not even a comparative point, because this is about free speech and politics and trying to take control of a university because there are students' free speech. If you're talking about like if COVID happened again and there was an order from a state, not the federal government, a state, because it's done by state. If a state said, hey, we're going to delay classes for a month and you need to make sure you have these precautions in, if it's a month, then we could talk about the arguments for that. But if we're talking about on the basis of free speech, that's a completely different ballgame.
Okay, so just to be clear, if a state then defunded Columbia University, you'd say that's fine. A state doing it.
Oh, not defunding it. No, not defunding it. No.
So if a state stops sending money to, so
but
I
still,
just want to be
trying
clear.
to reroute it back to COVID because you have to be in your little social, your
again,
culture
what we're
war
trying
topic.
to do is when you
your
start to talk about
topic.
when you start to talk,
I love it.
It has when you start to talk about authoritarianism, the truth is you cheered for a far more authoritarian government policy. And so your rings of authoritarianism ring hollow.
Yeah, you can't argue that point. You have to go back to this culture war. The
what
COVID, Fauci, Dr.
That's
Fauci,
not
like
a
Dr.
culture
Fauci
war.
again. You're like a parrot on repeat. Like you want to be a
Can
wind-up
you
toy.
explain?
Make actual points. Make actual points for Donald Trump right now. The biggest executive overreach is happening right now under Trump with the tariffs. That's unconstitutional. It's a dictator type shit. He's asking people to come to him for favors. He's bragging in the Oval Office about how much money him and his billionaire friends made yesterday. Bragging about that before he tells them to do insider trading because the market's going to be pumped. Like that's insane that you're going to divert back to COVID because that's where you have to fight in your home field.
It's not insane because what I'm talking about is people that cheered for radical authoritarian policies when
no, you're attacking the people who cheered for it. You can't defend Trump.
I'm not just attacking the people who cheered for it. I'm talking about the politicians that I'm talking about the politicians.
Who gives a shit about politicians? I'm talking to you about Trump. I'm talking to you about this.
Please stop interrupting me. Notice the difference.
No, because you're trying to divert. You're trying to run from it. You're trying to run from it.
I'm not running from anything. I'm not running from anything. Notice what you do is you constantly interrupt because you're not.
Notice what you do is you run away from the point. You can't talk about tariffs or
I'm not running away. I'm not running away.
First Amendment right.
I'm not running away whatsoever. What I'm talking about is people like you that cheered for massive authoritarian policies are now criticizing.
Oh yeah, people like me attack people like me. Don't attack the actual point because you don't have.
I am attacking the point. I'm attacking the point of the previous administration. It's not the biggest way ever.
More about COVID. You have
the First Amendment allows free association. Isn't telling people that they're not allowed to leave their house a bigger attack on the First Amendment? Isn't telling people that they need a vaccine passport to shop for groceries a bigger attack on the First Amendment?
If they would say, if they said that any person who says something pro-Palestinian can't leave their house, but everyone else can go out, yeah, that'd be a huge attack on the First Amendment. Hell yeah, because this is targeted. This is targeted on one campus. Why are they targeting Columbia? Why?
I'll talk about this in a second. I don't mind.
No, they're targeting Columbia because of their free speech of the students. They'd be targeting every school if there's a public health emergency like COVID. But this is targeting one school because of their First Amendment right.
I'll talk about this. I don't mind once we get away from the point that you're trying to run from. And the point that I'm trying to make is that you're clearly running from the fact that when you lament authoritarianism, what you really mean is you don't like it when this political side that you don't favor engages in authoritarian policies that are objectively, please, let me finish, that are objectively less authoritarian than the policies that you advocated.
Oh, it's objectively less authoritarian. Yes. Interesting.
Yes. So telling people that they can't leave their houses, shutting down. Yes.
Oh, wait, okay.
Stopping sending funding. Stopping sending funding is different than locking people down. Yes, it's not as authoritarian. Absolutely.
Okay, so
correct.
if there's a tidal wave coming and it's going to kill everyone in the area, and you tell everyone to move, is that authoritarian if you grab them and move them?
You would probably say that yes, it's authoritarian, but it would be worthwhile.
Okay, so Correct? Are you saying that Trump on Columbia is worthwhile?
I'm saying that there are arguments that you could make whether or not something's worthwhile. I'm saying that what happened with COVID was the people that cheered for that authoritarianism did not have reasons for doing it other than fear-mongering, which they never looked at the data to accept that. And I'm not running away. I'm directly answering the question.
Okay, so COVID was a global health crisis that just started, and we did not have information about.
Once more what you're doing is interrupting because you're incapable of allowing some to articulate a point because you know you can't defend it. So they locked people down and they censored people and made fun of them by saying, what do you want grandma to do?
I heard you loud and clear, buddy. I heard you loud and clear. You would not shut up. You would not shut your mouth. You heard me. All I heard was people. I live in the middle of it, buddy. I heard this constantly on Facebook and Instagram, everywhere. Outside, people are screaming. Everywhere. There was no one getting arrested. They could all tell their shitty opinions to the crowd. What I'm talking about is Columbia University, the president attacking a school, literally with masked agents, with unmarked cars, pulling kids into their cars that have committed no crime except speech the government doesn't like. And you want to pivot back to COVID? Like this is why
I don't want to pivot back to COVID.
And this is why I want to insult you because you are going back to this position and falling back into it because you have an ideological tie to it.
No, it has nothing to do with an ideological tie. One last thing I would say to this.
You
continue to talk about things like you call COVID a cultural issue. Would you say it's a cultural issue to the people that lost their businesses? Would you say, it's just a cultural issue?
No, talk about right now. Can you talk about 2025 at all?
with
You have not
virtue
talked about the year
signaling.
2025 because you're weak right now. Your points are so weak. Talk about the year
defend
2025.
You can't defend
Talk
it.
about the year 2025.
I just want you to
I was 6
just
years old in
admit-
2021. I don't even know
Just
what
admit
happened.
to everyone, I need to
2025.
interrupt. I need to interrupt. I don't
I
want to
need
talk
to
about it
interrupt.
because I
don't
can't
want to talk
defend
about
it,
it
and
because I can't defend it. And I want Rob
Thank
to
you.
defend the point on Colombia because the president right now is the biggest authoritarian we've had in the last 100 years as
That's
president,
not
except
true.
FDR.
So you just made a statement, and my direct response to that was talk about the more authoritarian policies that you and Joe Biden cheered for.
Pivot. It's actually stunning how you have not talked about the situation I brought up literally one time.
It's amazing.
Because you have to stay back in your realm. This is
so
why
when
you're
say
bad faith. Yeah.
If I said let's because I don't know what's not reaching
The
here.
First Amendment's a big deal to me.
If I said Joe Montana is the best quarterback ever, and you said, wait a minute, let's talk about Tom Brady's statistics, and I'd say, pivot. You won't talk about Joe Montana. You would say, how can we discuss whether or not someone is the best or the worst if you're saying that we can't look at comparative analysis? And so when you say he is the biggest authoritarian, and I say that's not true, the topic we just got done talking about was more authoritarian, and you're like, that's just culture war.
Who did the
that's
lockdowns?
pivoting.
Okay. Who was president during the lockdowns and who did the lockdowns?
There were Trump was president during the beginning of lockdowns that we saw. He wasn't personally doing the lockdowns. However, he embraced, and those policies were disgusting in his words and rhetoric that was embracing it. And then the lockdowns were primarily done by Democrats and
Republicans still did shutdowns.
But some did, and absolutely they were authoritarian.
Okay, so Republicans and Democrats were both authoritarian. Okay,
Correct.
Because both of them knew to different degrees what COVID was and what COVID, they also knew what they didn't know. So that's why Republicans and Democrats both operated off of the current information at the time to see how COVID would unfold. They both acted and they both shut down their economies at the same time, Republicans and Democrats. Right now, the Republican president is targeting on the basis of speech, legal residents or visa holders on the basis of their speech, and I want to talk about that because it's a bigger issue.
It's not a bigger issue.
We are bipartisan at the start of COVID. Bipartisan because we did not have information, and you want to be sleazy and bring up this information that we have now to go and rationalize your opinion because you know the Monday morning quarterbacking works for your narrative. But can we talk about the situation, like the complete deterioration of the First Amendment that's happening right now in America?
It's not Monday morning quarterback because I was saying these things at the time and I was criticizing.
There's a reason Ron DeSantis did shut down.
Stop interrupting. Please stop interrupting.
You keep lying.
I understand.
You keep lying.
I'm not lying.
Bro,
I'm
you
not
talk
lying.
About the current stuff. I want to talk about the Columbia.
You tell me where I lied. You tell me where I lied and what I just said. Go ahead.
You keep acting like there was no reason because Republicans and Democrats both found a reason to close economies to see how COVID played out. Now they both relinquished it at different rates, but at the time we did not have enough information to not do lockdowns because hospitals were overwhelmed. They were overwhelmed in Italy. That's how we knew about COVID to start with. That's why we weren't even prepared. We should have been. We could have been more ready, but that's why I think you're being dishonest because you keep on bringing it up like, I don't know what was happening during COVID. It became the number one cause of death in America. You know damn well what was happening during COVID, even if it wasn't happening in the middle of nowhere, which I'm from the middle of nowhere. It was not happening where I was, but I know there were places where it was affecting. And that's why I want to get to the actual explicit point here.
You say I'm lying, but then you insert opinions that I never said. Where did I say I didn't know what was happening during COVID?
Because you keep on bringing it up as if you weren't alive.
I was alive, and that's what I'm saying.
As if there was no justification or reasoning to do what they did at the start of it.
Again, stop interrupting, right?
Because you still won't talk about the Columbia.
Please stop interrupting. We could get to Columbia,
or the political
right?
prisoners.
If you would stop interrupting.
You have political prisoners, and you're crying about the lockdown.
If you would allow the conversation to proceed forward instead of constantly deflecting and interrupting, then the conversation may get to a place that you would be more favorable. I'm talking directly to your comparative stance that this is the most authoritarian president in 100 years, the actions that are occurring right now, and I'm saying by a long shot, the things that occurred under COVID were worse. I'm saying there is a fundamental disagreement that people could see for themselves. What you're saying is, if there are questions, then violate people's rights. We didn't know what was. Please,
if I knew the situation now, I would have made a different decision back when COVID started. I would have also had a vaccine ready for COVID.
You have every right to say what you're about to say as soon as I finish, right? It is clear that the position you're coming from is, if there is a fear out there that we don't know about, then the default position should be for the government to be authoritarian and do things like lockdowns. Right? It shouldn't be, and what I say, the opposite. The impetus is on the government before they will behave in authoritarian ways to say, this is why this is necessary. We have planned out to the best of our ability what we think the impacts will be if we don't do this, what the impacts will be if we do this, and we think comparatively authoritarianism in this sense is the way to go here. That's true if you're talking about combating terrorism. That's true when you're talking about free speech. That's true when you're talking about protection from a disease, etc. And so when you want to talk comparatively about things that are more authoritarian authoritarian and this being the most authoritarian. I think you're fundamentally wrong, and you've illustrated that actually your default position is to allow authoritarianism if you have questions, if you have uncertainty. I think that it should be the exact opposite.
Okay, so do you think that it's okay for Donald Trump to take political prisoners on behalf of Israel? For their speech? For their speech, for all the immigrants being their visa being revoked on behalf of their from their speech. Right now, the State Department is going through with no masks on, or with masks on, sorry, and unmarked vehicles, going in and tearing through these peaceful communities to take people into vans to ship them off to Louisiana on the basis of their speech. Because in my opinion, that's a really big thing to worry about.
Okay, so I will answer this question, right? First off, there's two different ways to look at this. There's the legality of it and the morality of it. I'll actually give you what you want. One of the things I've criticized Trump for heavily, I'm for defunding all of these universities. But if you're going to selectively do it, I think that what's occurring right now, if we're honest, is it's being done on the basis of protecting one country from their feelings being hurt, which is Israel. And I think it's despicable. And I think that it is something that we need to have a bright line for, to have an exact framework for when we're allowed to revoke visas, when we're allowed to revoke sort of student visas and things of that nature. However, I do think that as the United States, we have the right to people that aren't citizens in this country and are guests of this country, whether it be illegal immigrants, legal immigrants, green card holders, etc. We do have a right to say, if these people are antithetical to the United States, we could kick them out. That's different than sending them to prison. The due process isn't the same when it comes to having the right to continue to be a guest in the country. But having said that, I think that it is clearly being selectively applied on the basis of Israel, and it's something that I've criticized Trump over and over. The first person that got deported, Khalil, I forget his last name. You know who I'm talking about, though? Do you know?
Yeah, there's hundreds of students now.
So this was the first person, and there are allegations, and I'll ask you a couple questions about this. But in the future, there are allegations, for example, that he lied on his visa application and things like that. But it is clear that the initial targeting was because he was a visible person during these pro-Palestine protests. You would agree with that, right? I think we're both in agreement that that's why he was targeted. And I don't think that rises to the level of why we should be revoking someone's visa. But can I ask you a couple questions about this? Oh, you go ahead. You can
about this, or do you want to go? Because I was going to let you answer another question about lockdowns. Because
no. I have one question about that. We could go back to lockdowns, but while we're on this topic right now, so the question I'll ask you is: do you think the United States has the right to deport people that maybe didn't commit a crime, but we think are antithetical to the United States? For example, let's take this: if they're burning an American flag and saying "Death to America." Free speech in the United States, me and you have the right to say that as citizens, but should we have the right to deport someone who's not a U.S. citizen that says that?
So this is an issue for me with like Congress, for example, because Congress is essentially in a cult-like mentality right now. So on the tariffs, on other powers Congress should have, they could pass laws or at least make their stance known on these issues, but they can't disagree with anything like Trump does. So it's really hard for me because, if you want to use legal justification, if the Secretary of State can say like, oh, I want to revoke a visa, then okay. The normal standard would be you give like a 30-day notice, like your visa has been revoked, and leave the country by this date. There should never be an instance where there's masks on and they're going to a university with an unmarked van and just like rampaging through communities. Like there might be an issue eventually if they go to a more conservative area maybe and they want to use their Second Amendment right. How do they know they're federal agents taking this poor girl into a van? So when it comes to this issue right now, I think the checks and balances of our government in general, our constitution, but also just our government, it just is not functioning because you can't really question the leader. And the same thing with tariffs. They can rip across our communities and whatever. And Republicans, they're giving minor pushback with like Rand Paul and a couple others. But I think there's an issue right now with the Republican Party where it's valueless. It really gets just follow dear king. And that's really my biggest concern.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that framing, but regardless, let's take that framing out of it and the legality out of it and just say forget about the text of the Constitution or the INA or all these other things that regulate who we can deport and when. Do you think morally that the United States justifiably should be allowed to kick out guests of this country if they were saying something as simple as death to America and burning the American flag? Forget that some man in a mask that does it. We need to start from a framework of, do people that are guests in this country, not citizens, have the same free speech rights as me and you? Right? I think that's a worthwhile question to ask.
I've said to many people I've spoken with in real life too, where they say, you know, well, China and Russia don't let you come in and criticize their country. And I'm like, bro, if you want to bring the laws of China and Russia and North Korea to America, go live in those countries. You can easily move from America if you want someone to be restricted and we want to use violence against tourists and whoever for, you know, for just speaking. Like going through phones, like the fact that DHS is going through phones and everything, and they announced today they're going through social media feeds. They put up a post on social media which they quickly deleted today. I don't know if you saw it, but they said we have to prevent illegal people, money, and then it said ideas. We have to prevent illegal ideas from crossing over borders. And it's like, yeah, they're really just policing. And I want everyone to realize too, talking about China and bringing those policies here, they're using facial recognition technology and going through social media. If they're using facial recognition, just like the Patriot Act issues, and this is like Patriot Act on steroids that the Trump regime is currently doing, if they scan for faces of immigrants, if they scan for faces of anyone in this country, they're scanning all of our faces. They're scanning all of our faces and making a big database with all of our faces because they have to collect who's citizen, who's non-citizen. And that's like a huge Big Brother scenario that's happening right now. And I know Musk and a couple of the other Curtis Yarvin acolytes or whatever the hell those weird ass tech bros are, those brain dead nut draggers. Like they're following under this system where they think we need to be under mass surveillance. So I think we got to watch out for like Peter Thiel and Musk and this big cabal of these tech billionaires for sure.
I don't see how that was like. I'm not saying what you said there is true or not. I'm not like, it didn't seem to be an answer to the question at all. Like the question is pretty simple. We're just talking about like sort of philosophical principles of how a country should operate. Are you saying that that yes, citizens of this country have the exact same free speech rights as guests of this country? And so because we both agree as a United States citizen, we both have the First Amendment where we could say death to America. We should be able to say that, and we shouldn't be locked up for that. That's not a crime, correct? You agree with that portion. So should we, as a country, be allowed to kick out people that we bring in on a visa that say death to America? I hate America. They're going to rallies saying, I hope America dies. Or I'm pro-ISIS. You know, I think that ISIS is good. Should we have the right to kick those people out? Or, much like an American citizen, do they have the right to say that with no punishment?
Yeah, it's interesting there too, because if you have like someone who's an immigrant or a tourist and they're literally chanting death to America marching through the streets, then you can have a sympathetic attitude where it's like, hey, why is this person just like, it sounds like they're threatening people. So you could have a process for that possibly, but I don't think anything should be done unilaterally from one government official making a decision.
Well, okay, so I just am trying to get to a baseline. So you would say there could rise a level where speech that would be considered legal speech
just
for
like any speech, yeah.
Okay, but that would be enough to deport. So there is a lower tier of free speech available for people that aren't citizens that we could say, look, you've lost your privilege of being here.
I would say no. From a principles perspective, I would say no.
You would say that same principle of free speech applies equally to the citizen as the non-citizen.
Yeah, it would need to.
That's insane. That's asinine.
I don't want the government. I don't want the government regulating any speech.
That's completely okay. Having said that, would you feel the same
differently
way when it came
at least?
Okay, so then you were against pro-life protesters that were locked up for protesting abortion clinics.
If there were any that are actually protesting, but usually they assault people or like directly harass
many
them.
Many of them don't.
Okay, I need to find a case of this.
Okay, you want me to find a case where someone was arrested that didn't physically assault? Okay.
Well, at least like didn't like spit in someone's face or like get in their face or
Well, get in face? What does that mean?
Like spit in their face or harass them. I think harassment counts too, and stalking if that happened.
Okay, but what if it wasn't? If it was just if there was someone that was locked up that just because I believe you could disagree with me if you want. We could look this up. I believe the law says that you can't be verbally dissuading people from abortions or criticizing abortions within certain footage areas of abortion clinics. You would be against that law.
I'm okay with that law for the protection of the other person's right to not be walking into the doctor and have some crazy screaming at them.
But you acknowledge that that's an imposition on their free speech.
I think it's actually infringing on someone else's personal rights.
Let's assume that that's true, but you would also be an infringement on their free speech.
I don't think that someone should be in front of any doctor's office yelling at you about your health decisions.
But
that would be harassment. That would be targeted
harassment. You just previously said you always support free speech. You're pro free speech. Now you're saying
I support the same rights for citizens and non-citizens. I don't mean I support literally to calls to violence, of course. Anything that would not be covered under our legal definition of free speech in our court cases, I would not say.
So in that, for example, So in this particular example, you think that curbing their free speech is a net benefit because the harm that they inflict by other people having the right not to hear that while they're going in to get an abortion outweighs their free speech right.
I think having, I think there's a reasonable amount of preventing harassment that is definitely justified there to protect the other person's rights.
Well, I think that shows that you're not someone who would be anywhere near sort of a free speech absolutist. And I'm just going to be honest with you.
But you know the laws are though.
Please, just let me finish. I'm not being very wordy here, right? I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm not calling you names or anything, but I heavily think that the reason that it seems that you've sort of done almost a 180 on free speech in this short period of time is because it aligns politically with your message. You're probably someone who's heavily pro-choice, and so you don't have a problem with locking up people or having laws of not allowing people to protest in abortion clinics. But if someone said, well, we're going to have a law that says that you can't support a terrorist organization like Hamas, you would have a big problem with that. You would say that's outrageous. That's a violation of their free speech.
No, because that would not be content neutral is a big part of this. So like, for example, the abortion thing, like that matters for pro-life or pro-choice. So it's content neutral. Content neutral laws on that basis to protect someone's right to walk into a doctor's office without being harassed is totally different from saying we're going to target a mosque or a church or whatever. Totally different.
What do you mean target a mosque? That's not that. No one's
targeting a specific religion. Like
no one's,
I think.
But no one's doing that. Like no one's made that accusation other than me at one point talking about the Patriot Act targeting Islam.
Do you think a Nazi should be able to stand outside of a mosque screaming like Muslims are not human with a swastika?
I think if they're on public property, yes.
Okay, so if they're on the sidewalk in front of a mosque, a neo-Nazi should be able to like. Okay, I think
particularly if they're a citizen, that's free speech. You remember the Westboro Baptist Church people that were disgusting that would hold I can't use the word because but God hates homophobic slur for.
Well, you can still do that, but it's a reasonable like limit outside. So like for example, if you're walking into the church, you don't need to see that you're subhuman every single day. It'd be like a law. It'd be content neutral, so it'd be any religious place of worship. It could be a mosque or a church or a synagogue, whatever. But I'd be in favor of a law to prevent let people go to church or a doctor's office without being harassed. Yeah.
Well, again, like, where do you draw the line in this? Like, then, for example, what if it's a climate change protest and they're on a public sidewalk and not leaving people, people are trying to get into, hell, let's use an example that's happening right now. What if it's a Tesla dealership and people are screaming and not leaving people quickly enter a Tesla dealership to purchase a vehicle or to get maintenance on their vehicle? Would you be in favor of saying that should be outlawed? They're on the public sidewalk.
Isn't that should it be outlawed if you're preventing movement of people to get into a business? Yeah, that should be illegal.
Preventing movement, that's a different level. But just sitting there screaming,
I'd be okay.
Should that be illegal?
I'd be okay with some type of limit from illegal grounds for harassment targeting businesses. But then you're already committing civil disobedience if you go to over a certain amount. Or if you're doing vandalism, or if you're preventing movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you're like the Tesla dealership's right there, and like you can't be on the sidewalk right in front of it, you need to be off to the side. I'm not talking about that you can create these limits where it's like you cannot be seen in public or anywhere near the place. I'm just saying that someone should not be able to be like directly harassed anywhere within physical reach.
But you seem to be conflating two different things. Like, I guess then it hinges on what we consider harassment. Because interestingly, you seem to be making the point that I'm making. Because if you remember, I'm actually defending like people like Khalil, because look, if this particular case ends up that he was doing more things, like for example, if he was committing a crime by trespassing, or if he was committing a crime by physically assaulting people, blocking people, etc., that's different than just his free speech. But I'm operating off the assumption that forget about his visa issues, that the reason he was targeted was for the idea that he was free speech and in the eyes of this administration was supporting Hamas. I don't like that. I think that is clearly, I think that Israel has too much control over our country when it comes to these sorts of policies, and it's one of the down points of the Trump administration right now. And I think that it is something that we need specific bright line in the courts to weigh in on. Where is it that we're saying that legal, people that are here legally, illegal is different, but people that are here legally that we're going to deport, I don't think that it rises to the level of their free speech entitlements the same as us as American citizens, but there needs to be a bright line of like, well, what's the type of stuff that they would say that we would say that's too much, we could kick you out. I think maybe death to America would rise to that level. I don't think saying, hey, I think Israel's going too far, there's genocide in Palestine, I don't think that rises to that level at all. And it doesn't matter if I agree or disagree with that statement. I just don't think having a geopolitical perspective. Now, if they're saying, and I support Hamas and I'm giving financial money to Hamas and Hamas is designated a terrorist organization, it gets wishier. But I don't like the way that it's playing out right now. The point that I'm trying to make to you, though, is we have to have sort of a philosophical understanding of what free speech means means to us and when we're allowed to curb that. I think when you say, well, there are levels, like if you're physically stopping someone from leaving an area, yeah, that's a different crime altogether. That's a different set of problems. But when you say, I don't think you should be allowed there harassing them, I'm assuming that you're not talking about physically grabbing them or stopping them from entering. You're talking about them being right in front of Tesla on a sidewalk screaming, you suck, you're killing the world, Elon's a Nazi, you're a Nazi for buying a Tesla. Should they have the right to do that if they're allowing people to walk through them? Because it seems that what you're suggesting is you don't have the right to do that outside an abortion clinic. So are you also saying that for other areas where people would be shouting vile things at you on public property? And it seemed that you were like, well, not if they're spitting on them, not if they're blocking them from entrance. We agree those are totally different issues, just as the speech issue. So that's the question I have.
So there was I'm trying to see, let me see. I'm trying to find the actual court cases for this too, because I think that is somewhat of a guidance of what we can do. So what's considered reasonable for this would be like 8 to 15 feet. So like that's what I mean when I say like they can still be present and still protest, but it's not enough to like create physical altercations or enough to like literally be screamed in the ear. And you can shut them off from your vision as well. So like the example of like the Nazi standing out of a mosque, or pro-lifer standing out of a Planned Parenthood or whatever. So I think the 18 to 15 feet, it seems like that's usually legally held up, which is something I'd consider to be like, pretty reasonable as well. But then like 35 feet, Massachusetts tried doing this. 35 foot, the Supreme Court struck down 9-0 unanimously in 2014, saying 35 feet violated speech to a large extent. So I'd be okay with like 8, like that, like I just said, the 8 to 15 feet seems reasonable for like the Tesla example as well.
Okay, well, there's a problem though. I don't know if you caught that. I kind of lay a little trap for you here, right? The problem is, if the U.S. government, if the Trump administration embraces that same mentality and says every single student that we locked up screamed and harassed people within 10 to 15 feet of the entrance of college buildings, then haven't they just committed a crime?
Okay, so what I'm talking about right now is like, for example, if they would have said like, if they would have accused someone of a crime in this situation and not made it explicitly about speech, then they could. If there was rules about like, for example, like if they were outside of a synagogue or a mosque, whatever the protest was, and they were doing this and they violated that, then you can argue they're being civilly disobedient in a way that targets another culture or race. But now they're connecting the anti-Israel to anti-Semitism and saying they hate America as well. So like that's the big issue with like their framing of it and the unilateral powers. Because like, by the way, like this would never stand up in court if like on the basis of freedom of speech. I doubt it's going to stand up anywhere with like the current process they're going through. But if what you just said was like, if what you just said was a law, if it was a law that they couldn't be within 8 to 15 feet or whatever, and they were like literally standing in front of the door and shouting slurs at someone and harassing someone, then that's a little bit different. But it's also just a general protest to a foreign country that we fund and protesting a war that they're doing. So it's different than now, like, protesting the person's identity in front of you.
Let's be honest. Many of these protests weren't just people saying, hey, we're just criticizing Israel. There were certainly things that were being said that could reasonably be construed as anti-Semitic. And there's a lot of people that seem to be reasonable that are of Jewish orientation that said that they not only felt harassed, but felt intimidated. So you get into murky waters when you're like, well, I think that this sort of language is okay, but once it enters the area of like 7 to 15 feet, then I don't think it's okay. And just saying, well, if it was a crime, that's one thing. Well, that's not going to really help you, because I think you're actually wrong when you're looking at the legality of this, because my understanding of reading some of these policies is deportation is not considered a punishment. And sort of the way that like the INA is written said is we could basically deport people for any reason, that they're here at our privilege. And so like some of the reasons are like pretty vague. And so if someone
I don't like that.
That may be fine. You may not like it, but if you are embracing this idea, and if your idea that you're embracing here would be embraced by sort of the Democratic Party as a whole, theoretically, which is, you could shout harassing stuff, whatever, that makes people feel that they're being harassed, as long as it's outside of 15 feet. But once it enters inside of 15 feet, well, I think that's different. I think that there should be a law against that.
Well, the thing is,
real quick, I promise.
You're going over so many points here. You're kind of demonizing me in this process.
And we could prove that these people were within 15 feet of like an entrance to a college building, then it would seem, based on your rationale and the fact that they don't have to commit a crime to be deported, that would be reason enough to say, well, that's harassment and we should be allowed to deport people for harassment.
Okay, if they were going up to Jewish students and saying, we hate Israel, you're at fault, that's a totally different thing. That's targeted harassment, which is what I'm talking about with the mosque and what I'm talking about with, with the Planned Parenthoods. And like with the entire situation we're having here as well, you mentioned Jewish students. There are millions. There are thousands. Sorry, not millions, but there's thousands of Jewish students who are speaking out against Israel, and their voices are completely suppressed on these campuses. And the students do not, they're not listened to at all. There's Jewish voices that are very against what's happening right now, as far as revoking visas and what Israel is doing right now, and not being fond of the Israel government. So I think it's not good to act like all Jewish students are.
I'm not acting like that at all. I think that honestly, it's quite stark to me. I've personally been on campuses, particularly in the debate community, where I have been harassed for being white. No one gives a shit about that. Like, you ain't gonna see the Trump administration deporting people for that. You can continue to have curriculum to talk about the problems of whiteness. That ain't gonna lead to anybody being deported. So I think that there's a problem with this. I think that it is clear that Trump has a strong relationship with the nation of Israel, and that there were people legitimately that felt threatened by a lot of these protests that were Jewish, but there's an awful lot of more people that want to make excuses for any valid criticisms of Israel as being anti-Semitic. And they will stretch the law and stretch their influence they have in order to make sure that it's highly punishable. I think even more troubling than a lot of this stuff is a lot of the sort of hate speech laws and the way it's written that you see being suggested by Republicans all around this country that say certain things that you would say would be considered anti-Semitic that I think are legitimate protests. I thought it was ridiculous when it was it Ilhan Omar that said about AIPAC, it's all about the Benjamins? And everyone was like, well, that's anti-Semitism. I disagree. You're talking about one of the successful lobbyist groups in our country who's clearly using their money and influence to influence the United States, and you're saying that it's racist and bigoted to mention that it's about money to them? Of course it is. It's not because they're Jewish. The fact that Jewish people might have that stereotype that, oh, if someone criticizes me about money, it's because I'm Jewish. No, maybe it's because I think you're doing bad things with money. It has nothing to do with your ethnicity. So I'm in agreement with you that I actually have big problems with the way this has been done. Now, this conversation's separate from illegals. We should be able to kick any illegal out at any point whatsoever because they're not here legally. I don't give a shit if the reason we give for that is they're criticizing Israel or not. But it's a different question when it comes to people that aren't citizens with legal status. I would like to see some sort of bright line. I'm probably closer to saying, yes, I'm okay with deporting certain people for certain language. But I would like to see exactly what the government is saying. This is the line that if you go over this language, we could deport you. But I think you're directionally correct that the reason that these people are being targeted is because they're criticizing Israel. And I have a massive problem with that. And I've said so, not just on my show, but I don't know if you know, like this lawyer I debate all the time, Pisco. We had a big conversation about this like 2 weeks ago, where I talked all about this. You can find it at my channel. So your pushback that I'm not going to talk about this, because I'm only pointing out that a lot of people like Pisco that are talking about this authoritarianism like you were perfectly fine with what I think is objectively far more egregious authoritarianism that we've seen in past administrations.
I agree. Ron DeSantis is way worse than Trump is, because Ron DeSantis did lockdowns and Trump didn't, because he was not a governor, but he would have if he was a governor.
It's interesting. There's an interesting argument to be made there. Clearly, Trump embraced lockdowns after DeSantis, right? So from the perspective of a DeSantis supporter, which again, I favored DeSantis in the primary over Trump. From the perspective of a DeSantis supporter, you would say, yeah, but Trump embraced lockdowns long after and then criticized DeSantis for lifting out the lockdowns, which is true. But if you're a Trump supporter who wants to criticize DeSantis, what you would say is, but Trump never signed the order to do the lockdown and DeSantis did. It's an interesting philosophical question of who you put more blame. I tend to lean more towards it was authoritarian by DeSantis. It was terrible. He should be held to some account. He has apologized for it, but it's still terrible. But still, the president of the United States paying lip service to lockdowns and criticizing DeSantis for lifting them makes him worse on lockdowns than DeSantis. That's where I fall on that.
Just so we can reroute back to this for a second before we get off here. We've been talking for a while, and thank you for chatting too.
Yeah, no problem. I thank you for coming on. I was supposed to do a debate tonight, so I had nothing to talk about. We were talking about Luka Doncic and fucking Mavericks, so I'm glad you.
I was actually just in Pittsburgh because I travel around for work a little bit. But if I'm ever in Western PA again, maybe I could let you know. We could do an in-person debate with Pittsburgh in the backdrop or something. But yeah, just on the tariffs, okay, my big points that I have an issue with, okay, so there's no proven theory where this moves manufacturing jobs. Now, factories will take maybe 3 to 5 years to build, maybe longer to get entire supply chains, okay, so my economic issue, aside from the issue that Congress should be doing this, it should not be a president, and Congress essentially said, we're hands off, Trump can keep on doing, tariffs. Some senators, like I said, Rand Paul, are pushing back against it. But having this rapid policy that changes all the time is not going to spur the 5 to 10 year investments that we need to move manufacturing back to America. It's a very unstable plan, and countries are getting annoyed that Trump is shifting the tariffs every single day, and business owners are as well. Like, well, how am I going to make a long-term plan for this now? And my other point as well is we're doing a huge tax cut again, mostly going to, and the biggest portion is the top bracket. But also we're kind of replacing that revenue with tariffs, which are going to affect more so than income tax would, like a sales tax to the American people. I don't want working class Americans to pay for a problem that the ultra wealthy largely caused, and they also profited from it. So in my opinion, it would make more sense to find a funding mechanism that taps from them to fund this transition. If we do need to bring manufacturing back, we should be having them finance most of it or pay for most of it, because they're going to benefit from it when we do that. So with those 2 points, where it's like a rapid economic policy, how can businesses adapt to it? And also like it's taxing the American people, which I think is unfair.
Okay, so you're going to be surprised that there's some agreement that we have on this, actually, right? So the first thing is the idea of Congress. That was the first thing you said. I sort of agree. I think that Congress has abdicated its fiscal responsibility in huge ways under both Republican and Democratic presidents, and it's outrageous. Like, Congress is supposed to control the power of the purse. The truth is, the biggest problem, in my opinion, with our country is that you could just give me a quick answer. What do you think the strongest branch of government is?
I think it definitely should be Congress.
But what would you say it is? I agree with you.
Yeah, there's a huge issue with executive power, and this goes through it like every president.
Yeah, but I would say specifically, I agree with you, but I would say specifically it's the bureaucratic state. Like, I think the previous administration showed us, like, Joe Biden wasn't running the show. Like, the problem is presidents come and go, but this unelected bureaucratic state that's really in charge of making the on-the-ground decisions, they're the ones that are sort of unaccountable, and they're making the decisions that remarkably affect us, whether that be Obama, whether it be if McCain would have won, whether it be George Bush, etc. That's where the real things are getting done. So, for example, even when it comes to funding, the truth is, I think you would agree with me, like, the way we do funding in Congress is a joke. We wait until, like, it's almost the 0 hour, and then we pass these continuing resolutions or these omnibus bills that are thousands of pages that are riddled with pork that almost no congressperson that's voting on it's read the entire thing. And even if they did, they haven't had time to understand. Like, I think we both agree that's a big problem, right?
I think we need to also, like, so I'm not against the bureaucracy in a sense of, well, if you view it as like we have one executive that's a president, they have like their cabinet and they should control the show, then that definitely can be your perspective there. But I think that's more directly unitary executive and more authoritarian than it would be, because the bureaucracy is a buffer made by agencies that Congress is putting into law. It's a buffer that, like, when you vote for a president, you're voting for the entire administrative state. I did not vote for Joe Biden. I did not vote for Kamala Harris. I did not vote for Obama. I voted for who they're going to have working for them. Same with Trump. They hand him executive order. She's like, what is this one? I have hot dogs. Oh,
so you find it
hot dogs. It's like he doesn't know what the things are that he's signing either.
Okay, so you find the Democratic criticism of, like, oh, it's not really Trump, it's people like Mux, that you think that's an absurd criticism, because it turns out that there were unelected people before whose name you don't know that had access to the very same information that that the Democrats are criticizing someone like Musk having.
Yeah, I would definitely say I'm voting for the platform. I think the real politics is in Congress and also state politics, for sure.
Well, I guess I'll just give my perspective on this.
Okay.
I think you're underselling sort of the power of the bureaucracy and the fact that it basically stays the same throughout even changing administrations of changing political parties. Those people it's not a good thing. It's a very bad thing. They're unaccountable. So let's look at just, for example, the power of the purse specifically. If you're someone that's concerned that Congress should be the most powerful branch and you think that they've been abdicated to executive authority, think of how this goes. Congress signs this funding bill that's thousands of pages that almost none of them have read, and it gives this money, but the devil's in the details of how the money's spent. So, for example, like something like USAID, they might sign something that's like $5 billion to cancer research. But the way that's being implied is being done through these bureaucratic agents that aren't elected, that are basically staying there through one presidential term to the next. They basically stayed there from W. Bush to Obama, from Obama to Trump largely, from Trump to Biden, and they'll be there from Biden to Trump. And that's why we see these decisions that end up benefiting sort of people that aren't the middle class, that aren't the working class, because the real power in Washington isn't changing. It's always the status quo. And so I don't disagree with you that I think a better policy would be, we have too much, whether it be with tariffs or whether it be with sort of attacks, declaring war, etc. Congress was supposed to be the ones that are more on point in that, but they've abdicated their responsibility. And it's not even the president, it's people behind the president, most of which never changed, that are an unelected bureaucracy. This should scare the shit out of everyone, right? Like, for example, when Chuck Schumer said that the president of the United States in 2016 couldn't criticize the FBI because if they did, they'd find 6 ways of Sunday of getting back at them. Donald Trump is the leader of the FBI. He is the leader of that agency. And here is his direct opposition, the most powerful Democrat at that point, Chuck Schumer, saying, we can't criticize the FBI. They're unelected and they'll screw us over. They'll find 6 ways of Sunday. Like that, it doesn't get more unelected than that, right? And those people are here to stay. So I do agree with you that the problem isn't just with Trump, it's that historically, and we can see when it comes to these issues of tariffs specifically, I forget what president it was, where they signed this legislation that basically gave tariff responsibility to the president. So it seems entirely legal. But I think you're right. I would prefer that we have actually members of Congress that are doing their job and actually doing things when it comes to the power of the purse and doing things when it comes to international trade. I think for an emergency level, I don't have a problem with president having temporary emergency powers over things like tariffs, etc. But that, I'll give you a chance to respond. That's what I feel. I'm directionally in agreement with you that I would rather Congress be doing this stuff, but they're not going to because they're worthless.
So like Congress is the entire issue. The gridlock in Congress, the fact it's dominated by their stock trading and their inability to focus on good policy, that's the issue with the executive, in my opinion. Because if they wanted to change the culture of these different agencies, they could pass more clear laws. So they run more effectively. They could, make different standards on when to hire and fire people, which can help the president, if there is an issue, go through a legal process to fire someone, to identify the problems, which there are some legal processes for removing people that Trump kind of bypassed a few times. That's a different conversation. My overall thing is why I think it's a good thing why you have career bureaucrats is because you want people from, like, I'm happy there's people from Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush again, Obama, Trump, Biden, and Trump, because that is an anti-corruption mechanism within itself. That's why I don't like the unitary executive theory, because their goal is to fire all the other people that could be a balance on their power, instead of having to be like I want the government to be made up of Republicans and Democrats, even in the executive. But if we don't have a bureaucracy that is set by Congress, that Congress actually maintains, and that's the big issue for me, is the lack of Congress, because we basically don't have a Congress anymore. It's complete BS. But that's my issue, because I like that. I think it's an anti-corruption mechanism. But after you answer this, I want you to
anti-corruption to who?
It's anti-corruption for the executive branch. So it's not like there's only Democrats interpreting the law or only Republicans. You have a mixture of both. But once you respond to this, I just want to know what would you do are there any reforms that you would pass to fix Congress?
Sure. Okay, I'll get to that in a second. But it's anti-corruption to people who would threaten the status quo. But those that have the power, like, for example, if you look at the first impeachment of Trump, over and over, you had people from the State Department saying Trump was going against our foreign policy. But Trump's the leader of the State Department. He sets the foreign policy as the duly elected leader. So the problem is the bureaucrats that came from Obama, that came from W. Bush, that came from Clinton, those bureaucrats in that chain of it were saying, it's our policy, we set the policy, and we expect the president to go along. And this goes back to what Chuck Schumer was saying. If you get someone in there that says, no, I don't like that. I don't like the fact that the real power lies with the bureaucracy, and so we're going to challenge that, then they'll come after you. And you could say, well, that's an anti-corruption mechanism, because that ensures that if you get a Republican president that's corrupt, the bureaucratic state could go after them. If you get a Democratic president that's corrupt, the bureaucratic. But what happens if the bureaucratic state's corrupt? And the status quo, you say that you like that, well, then you're advocating for a status quo, and you could understand why people want radical change, because that status quo certainly has won and been good for the people at the top of this country, but it has been abysmal for the people in the middle of this country. And they're waking up to that fact. They were lied to about the promises of the people that run these mechanisms, about NAFTA, about China entering the World Trade Organization. And they've been repeatedly told how great the economy is doing, because we point to things like the stock market, we point to things like GDP. All the while, we are entering unsustainable levels of debt, and there's no accountability because these people aren't elected anyways. You don't even know most of their names that are running these bureaucratic.
One big point then.
What's that?
There's one big point about this, though. Like, so there's executive power, and that executive power is delegated through all these agencies that Congress made. Now, if you get rid of the agencies, my concern is you're not getting rid of executive power. So the president then, with the unitary executive theory they're looking to achieve, has all that executive power siphoned to only him, essentially, because all the cabinet members are yes people. They're going to say yes to whatever Trump says. So my thing is the big bureaucracy makes it harder for the executive for one person like the president to control the entire executive branch as a unitary executive. And that's my big thing right now. If like I might be able to agree with you in some areas if Congress took back tons of power from the executive, but I think that's completely not going to happen ever. But the executive would still have way too much power, even if you fire people from it. The government's big or smallness is a power thing, not a people thing.
I don't disagree, but the problem is if I accept everything that you just said, and there's a lot that I agree with there, right? I still think that the bureaucracy is the real problem, but certainly it comes through the executive having more power because the bureaucracy is there as part of the executive than Congress, and Congress has abdicated their power, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is, at least in my world, when you're saying unitary executive, blah, blah, like all that stuff, like at least there's accountability in the fact that we can get rid of it in 4 years. How do we get rid of the bureaucratic state? Who votes on getting rid of that? If Congress is unwilling to do the job and the president is neutered by them because they're really running the show and they'll go after presidents that challenge them, as Chuck Schumer's even admitted, then what's the mechanism for ending that?
You need to prove they're not following laws by Congress, because all they can do is follow the laws and execute them. So you have to find like which laws of Congress are passed that the executive is not following. Because if the bureaucracy is not following the laws, they're not following the law in general. That can be challenged. But like the Congress needs to pass better laws. I think you're blaming the executive and bureaucracy for the fault of Congress.
Well, but still, if we've both admitted that Congress won't do it. So at least the world I'm talking about has accountability in that we could point to, that's the guy that made the decision, Trump and the cabinet guy that he appointed. We reject them. It might take 4 years, but we will vote them out of office and their people, and we'll put in their opposition. The way it works today, we can't do that. We're both admitting that Congress isn't doing anything to change it, and Congress should do more. So in that world, why would we prefer a bureaucratic state that members of Congress are admitting we're afraid of? Because if we go after them, they have the power. And the idea that it's like, well, what can they legally do? Well, it's not a matter of legality. Legally, Congress has abdicated this responsibility and allows, for example, on things like funding, allows these organizations to have this sort of monolithic control on how this money is put into effect. And so,
well, I hate Chuck Schumer, so
okay, but from my perspective, like look at it from someone like me, like hell, let's take me out of it. I'm not a big pro-life, pro-choice, but I am pro-life, but it's not something I talk about a lot. I think people are more articulate on that position than me. But like, why, for example, should my tax dollars go to USAID to fund abortions in another country? Why should that occur? But I have no say over that. If Congress would vote on it, then yeah, I could have some say by voting, but Congress is going to abdicate the responsibility. And instead we say, well, that's just HIV funding. And so it falls under that umbrella, and those mechanisms can do what they want. How would you feel if we took all of that money that went toward HIV funding and funded pro-life, pro-Christian programs in Africa? Wouldn't that infuriate you?
Well, they're kind of doing that now. Like my issue, like they're using my money to take political prisoners. So like, you know what I mean? So that's already an example.
Well, no. So it's different than you disagree with sort of immigration policies that are being acted by the president versus the funding question. The funding question is we fund sort of causes that Congress has said, here's a cause worth funding, stopping fire damage in Somalia. But the way that funding gets put into almost always is anti-populist, pro-democrat, pro-progressive sort of mentalities. For example, we fund PBS through this that's clearly progressive, hates populism, hates conservatism. This happens over and over again. So from that perspective, if we're both offering competing visions and we're both saying the solution would be Congress actually being responsible, but both of us are in agreement that ain't happening anytime soon, and that hasn't happened. So in solution one, you have your solution of the status quo, which we could see the harms of the status quo of not only how it's hollowed out the middle class in this country, not only how like our Congress is afraid of them and our presidents are afraid of them, but that it funds things that are directionally oppositional to me and there's no accountability to it. Versus the second, which is, okay, you might not like the president, and if they had more control, might fund things that's directly oppositional to you, but at least there's accountability in the fact we'd know who's doing it, and we could remove them from office.
It's just hard, like when Trump is going through and just like firing FBI agents that worked on January 6th, and he's just like denying basic rule of law, or like when the attorney general is just like dismissing Mayor Adams' corruption cases and a bunch of other crazy things. I want there to be a layer of protection from if a corrupt president comes into office who wants to violate laws and break laws. You want people in charge who are, people in the bureaucracy that are not going to break laws. Because if the president can bring in new bureaucrats every time, he could just bring in people to bypass all laws. And that's basically what they're doing right now. But like, it still is. The issue still is with Congress. And you said before, you're probably against every government agency. I'm in favor of agencies doing things, and we need agencies and bureaucrats to carry out the laws if we have laws. But you're against like funding education.
Sure.
I'm sure you get rid of the Department of Education. So like something like that, yes. I'd be pro something like that. But I'd say, okay, instead of eliminating it, let's write laws to make it better. And if they don't follow the laws, then we can talk about restaffing them. Well, but I never want it to be just like, I don't like these people, so we got to replace them.
Well, I think that a big problem is that the federal government is way too big and is involved in way more things than it should. The Department of Education would fall into that. I think since the creation of the Department of Education, which if I'm not mistaken, wasn't created by an act of Congress, but was created by an executive order. I think since the creation of that, we've seen education in our country decline rapidly, even though we've increased funding for education to the point where it's a joke in many of the areas where you'd want it to be most successful, such as in the inner city. And as you know, in rural communities, education oftentimes a joke, public schooling in there. But that's a conversation for another day. I don't mind having it. But I certainly think that there should be some executive agencies. Like we should have an executive agency for law enforcement, like the equivalent of what the FBI does. We should have executive agencies for the State Department, et cetera. Of course, those sorts of things should exist. The problem I have is you're like, well, I want them there to ensure that a president's not being corrupt. But what happens if they're corrupt? Like, for example, what do you say to the whistleblowers that came out from the IRS and the FBI that said, for example, Ziegler and Shapley, that were saying, look, we were doing our job like we would with anyone else, looking into financial crimes of the Bidens, and basically the FBI told us, no, you can't do that. How do we stop that corruption?
I can't verify that story. Do you have another example that I might know about?
Well, like there are stories replete with the fact that our FBI is targeting as aggressively as possible people like Trump that Chuck Schumer told us that they would because he criticized the FBI, and then defending the people that they said privately were saying, and even sometimes publicly, that they wanted to win, like Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden.
Chuck Schumer's such an idiot. Like Chuck Schumer is literally the dumbest person on the planet. And if I ever run for politics, I hope they find this because he's so unpopular. Like Chuck Schumer's literally the biggest dumbass ever. I hope he never shows his face again. I want someone else to be the leader. Holy shit! Why would he say that?
He's right.
Like Trump did illegal shit, but then Chuck Schumer says dumb shit like that, and it makes it seem like it's invalid all the cases are brought against Trump. And we'll talk about that later. But it's just so Chuck Schumer is just a political mess. I can't even say the words I want to use to describe that dumbass. But anyways, I am losing gas. But
that's fine. We could wrap it up. Just to talk real quick, if you want me to respond to the other tariff stuff you said, that was just the point on Congress. Directionally, yeah. I agree with you. Congress should have more control, okay. Right? The other points you made about tariffs, I think you made two other points. The predictability. Yeah. You're not wrong, right? Like, to me, tariffs are more successful as a negotiating strategy. Would you agree that there are certain countries, you don't have to say all, you can think that Trump's gone overboard, but there are certain countries, many of which are considered our allies, that have erected unfair trade barriers against the United States?
Unfair is a big word there for me.
Okay, let's take the word unfair. They have erected barriers that surpass.
Yeah, I'm not saying tariffs cannot exist in any capacity.
Well, no, I'm not saying. But what I'm saying is, if from the tariffs would benefit one country and harm another, correct?
That's hard. It could harm a country if they do it too aggressively. But if they do it at like small amounts for like targeted, like what everyone says, targeted tariffs can work.
Okay, so then what does the country that's on the losing side of that targeting tariff do if they can't tariff in response to that? For example, let's not talk hypothetical. Europe heavily tariffs the United States automobile industry. If the United States wants their automobile industry to thrive and be able to have access to the European market, and these tariffs exist, what's the recourse that the United States could do?
The U.S. could probably leverage, like right now we leverage our defense a lot throughout the globe. Like when we talk about financial deals or trade deals, I think leveraging U.S. defense or opening trade routes would probably make more sense than just like tariffs as a negotiation tactic.
I think certainly the things you're saying there are possibilities, and Trump's doing that. Trump is leveraging our defense. That's one of the things he talks about heavily, and even in his first term, he leveraged criticizing heavily the amount of defense being spent in NATO and European countries failing to meet their obligations, et cetera, et cetera. But the point that I'm trying to make here is the status quo has been one where this has just gone unabashed. Our allies have taken advantage of it. So there is there's
no evidence of that, though.
That's the auto tariffs.
Well, America's the rich. Like we still have a lot of cars in like Europe, for example. We have hundreds of thousands of cars in Europe per year. And taking advantage of us is a big word when we're the richest country of all time. Like I said before, we're getting a lot of benefit from these trade deals, but the working people and middle class people are not getting the benefits from those directly. Wait, are you saying you're just like? Are you saying you're like generally pro tariff or like pro what Trump's doing right now? Because I feel like this is an extreme.
I'm generally anti-tariff, but to
you're
me,
anti,
it doesn't
okay.
exist in a vacuum, right? For me, it is to threaten tariffs and to threaten unpredictable or strong politically posturing, particular to our allies, but also to our enemies that are putting barriers up to free trade, is a defensible position to their barriers to free trade from a free tradist perspective. So I think even a libertarian that wants like pretty much zero government intervention could adapt the position that, look, we're not starting from a clean slate where no one has trade barriers and then all of a sudden Trump starts to erect them. We're starting from a position of a bunch of countries have all sorts of different trade barriers. Maybe it's VAT taxes, maybe it's tariffs, maybe it's laws that they have that say that there are certain things that they're not allowed to import. So for example, maybe it says we won't accept your agriculture because it's genetically modified, or we won't accept your livestock because you give it such and such a hormone which we won't attack. And that erects some sort of trade barrier, whether rightly or wrongly, that you agree with. And because of that, one of the ways that you ultimately try to eliminate that barrier is erecting barriers yourself that sort of causes a mutual pain as a negotiating tactic to remove them down. So in this sense, in particular, when you talk about predictability, I don't disagree that you're correct. There is a problem with creating a massively unpredictable situation. Businesses thrive on predictability, and would you want to invest your money in creating a company if you thought that on a whim presidents could change their minds on trade policy? Probably not. That's something, you're absolutely right about that. But on the other hand, being unpredictable can be an advantage, because if Europe looks like, not just with tariffs, by the way, there's solid evidence that there was a bunch of intel that was buried in 2016 that said actually Putin preferred Hillary Clinton because she's so predictable, because it would just be an extension of the business as usual foreign policy that we had through Obama, through Bush, through Clinton, etc. So they knew how to react to that. The problem with Trump is he's a wild card, and people are like, we don't know what to do. And so we're going to mind our P's and Q's because he might do something. Everybody knew if Kamala Harris won, she wasn't going to do shit about the trade barriers, for example, in our European allies. They knew that. Right now, as we speak, the EU is threatening to fine U.S. social media companies billions, if not trillions of dollars for not censoring what they call disinformation. That is a massive attack on U.S. businesses, and that's going to go through, particularly if Kamala wins, without any push whatsoever from the executive branch or Congress in this country, which is despicable. So the unpredictable nature could convince Europe, listen, this guy may be willing to sabotage his entire country's stock market and to increase consumer prices because he's so pissed off at us because of what we've done. Maybe it's time to sit down. Whereas they would have never came to that conclusion. So I'm not saying that what you're saying is not without warrant. Certainly you could go too far and create such an unpredictable environment that it ends up worse off in the future. But that unpredictability can be an advantage. And if you don't mind, I'll say something real quick about the second part that you said, which is I think the fatal flaw in Trump's plan here is ultimately, because we have a representative democracy, if his plan was to work, it would take years and years and years. But I think Europe, if they're smart, would realize all we got to do is hold out for 2 years till the midterms. If the United States citizen is paying more in products because of that, and if manufacturing isn't coming, then they're likely to elect people that repudiate Donald Trump, which will mean that he'll have to give in because Congress would be more likely to step in there. And so I think because if there was a possibility of this long-term strategy working, I think Europe will understand, because of the changing nature of our electoral system, that they might be able to wait it out.
Okay, so like the big points against like what they've been saying, like Australia and the U.S., we have a trade surplus, a pretty big one. And then like the EU said they dropped tariffs to 0. And Trump said that wasn't good enough. He said you have to buy $350 billion of our goods. He put tariffs on Canada and Mexico at 25% for no reason. And he's threatening Mexico again tonight as we're talking. He said they violated a treaty from 1944 about water. And also our U.S. 10-year bond yields, I think we're hitting like above at 5% again, which is extremely high. Other countries are abandoning.
That's more worrying than the stock market, by the way.
And Trump needs to, like, if Congress doesn't take power back from Trump and he keeps on doing this wishy-washy stuff for another 3 months, I feel like we're gonna have a financial collapse. Because we need solid policy that's gonna stick. That's not gonna change every single day. The market can't handle it, and Americans and small businesses can't handle it either. And my big thing as well is just like, just because something is good for the market doesn't mean it needs to be bad for people. It just is that way because of our system. But we could all grow in a decent market. None of us can grow in a bad market in unpredictable territory. So like if Trump doesn't pull off this quick, and or at least find a solid footing, or maybe give some power back to Congress. I think we're going to go through a couple, turbulent weeks, or maybe a few months. It's really, but if he keeps on doing this exactly, I don't know what's going to happen, because this is unprecedented. Economic shakeup. But we already had a lot of credit card debt and a lot of auto loans and a lot of other, and the housing mortgages are defaulting at higher rates since like 2008. So we have a lot of stuff coming up.
Would you say, I know this is a very complicated question, but just to simplify, would you say that the status quo as we'd seen it for the past 20 years was not sustainable?
Not sustainable in terms of economic inequality. Like, we're at the point where there's usually a collapse in the system, whether it's a revolution or whatever. Like, every time we get to this point of inequality, people get really unhappy, and I think it's a power struggle, because people at the bottom have no power. It's not even about material. They feel powerless. They see people in these nice mansions and all these politicians, and they want a different system. But I think you can break the status quo in a way that's better or a way that's worse. And I think right now it's just becoming fragmented, and not like, we don't have a plan to build for something for 5 to 10 years. If Congress passed a law that's like, okay, we're going to have this year to make a trade deal, because like the Canada-Mexico trade deal took like 2 years. Every other trade deal takes a long time too, like with like South Korea. Our trade deal with like our relations with Australia took a long time. If we had a bill that said we're going to put like 10% tariffs here, 5% here, we're going to do these tax credits for American businesses, a couple subsidies maybe, and here's our 5 to 10 year plan to rebuild America. Sort of like a CHIPS Act in a way that, and you can imagine, just like when you go to bed tonight, dream of a CHIPS Act that you would like. Okay, your version of a CHIPS Act. If we had something like that with a 5 to 10 year structure, completely different scenario. But right now, there's no reason to be confident in where the U.S. is economically as a trade partner.
Okay, so I'll say I think that it is not sustainable for some of the reasons you said, and I think others, the massive debt that we're having, also the fact that we're reliant on certain manufacturing goods that are quite necessary to our country in a litany of ways, such as steel, rare earth metals, production of medicine, production of ammunition, etc., from countries that we consider our biggest geopolitical threat, like China. None of this was sustainable. As China continues to rise, if we are this reliant on them, we're hosed. But I think you absolutely make a valid point about income disparity. And this is a point that people miss all the time, right? It's not just, even in the United States, where you see levels where you see like increased crime and stuff, it's not just necessarily, oftentimes it certainly is the lowest impoverished level, but a lot of times what you see is there's a lot of animosity because of the wealth disparity. So if you live in a community, let's say you live in a community that objectively makes more money than me. You're making more money than me, right? But everyone in my area is poor. There may be less animosity than your area because you're slightly less poor than me, but everyone else in your community is ridiculously rich, or a small proportion are ridiculously rich there. You would agree with that, right? There are unique problems that come with wealth disparity. And I think that the more you see, particularly people that, not because they're trying to live off the government dole, but people that for years and years did backbreaking work that are basically being told tough luck, learn to code, like that there was something was going to come to a head. And historically, this has happened, and it's almost always involves violence. So I think that Trump is commendable, because I don't think you could name one major political candidate that had any serious attempt that they were trying to break the status quo. So I commend Trump for at least making an effort. Whether or not that, you're absolutely right that an effort doesn't mean it'll work. It can make things worse. That may be the case. I think if we're honest, though, both of us would say we don't know how this is going to play out. I ultimately think that as things get poorer, Trump will make adjustments, and we'll end up with trade deals with these countries and the stock market. And we won't get the radical change that maybe Trump is suggesting, but we'll get more favorable things than the status quo has been. That's my prediction of what's going to happen, but it could be wrong. You have people like Peter Schiff that's out there today saying this is it. This is going to be the end of United States hegemony. People are going to sell the dollar. They're going to realize it's unpredictable. Europe's going to start trading with China. That's it. U.S. loses its status as world superpower. All of a sudden, not only are we not going to have cheap goods, people are going to lose faith in the dollar and the United States. That could happen, right? But at least I guess that he tried something. And, that's the place I put on it. I think it's too close, or it's too quick to just look at the stock market or to look at like things of what Europe's saying. And I ultimately think that coming from a position of a more stronger point, and this is classic Trump art of the deal stuff where he makes like a big sell. No, we don't even want non-negotiation. We want you to buy more. We must have a zero deficit. That's what we want. We didn't care about your tariffs, right? I think that in his mind puts you in a stronger negotiating point than when it's like, oh, well, we'll completely eliminate our tariffs and we'll agree to, we'll have a mineral deal with you where we agree to buy minerals from you. And so that'll decrease the trade deficit. I don't think you get there under Kamala Harris. I don't think you get there under Joe Biden. I don't think you get there under Barack Obama. And I think the proof's in the pudding because they didn't attempt anything in a serious nature like that to deal with the trade imbalances and the massive spiraling debt that's out of control, the hollowing out of the middle class of this country. They seemed content to go along with the donor class that was happy that they were all getting wealthy, and it was business as usual.
I'm gonna use this as like my final thing.
Sure.
To my usual. And by the way, thanks again. My name is Jola Talks Politics on YouTube. If anyone wants to call into I do a call-in show every night around 10 p.m. Eastern. I have a phone number. I'm making like a terrible TikTok channel on YouTube. I'm almost at 25K subs. So if anyone wants to chat from Rob's stream, definitely feel free to hop on and argue with me after this. And I would just say like I'm definitely sympathetic to wanting change. If you could take what's that guy's name? Is it Osborne, the independent running? Is it Osborne, the independent running in is that Nebraska or I forget what state that was. Osborne.
I don't know who you're talking about, but
1 second. If Donald Trump, Dan Osborne, okay, he's a former he's a Navy vet, industrial mechanic, and former labor union leader. I'm pretty sure he's running in Nebraska as an independent, and he did really well in a Senate election. If like Donald Trump was Dan Osborne or some other guy who's just like, I don't know, a vet and a mechanic, and he's getting into politics to break the status quo, I'd be sympathetic to just like believing that person is like a shakeup. He can really shift the system. But Donald Trump is, an Epstein partier, P. Diddy best friend, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton best friend, donor, who's been intertwined in these circles his entire life. He's a reality TV guy. We don't even know like how much money he's worth or if he really was successful in business. Like, he is not the savior. I would be very sympathetic to like Donald Trump's views and a person that's genuine and really cares about the stuff that Trump claims to care about. So like Dan Osborne, if you guys have a chance to look him up, really interesting case. He really is like what you'd call like a moderate or a centrist or like an actual populist who's from like a real background. And I think Dan Osborne is a good example for how you can get involved in politics in the local level as well. And you don't need to be a progressive or a liberal or a Kamala or Biden or a MAGA or a Trump. You could just come into politics and caring about issues that affects you. So definitely, I'm very sympathetic to your guys' want for a different future, but I think it's only going to come if we elect people like Dan Osborne and politicians who are not as intertwined in these corporate influences. But yeah, thanks for the chat. If you want to ever schedule like a more pointed debate on like an actual topic,
that would be
so
fun.
we both come prepared. Let me know. I usually do call in with people who are just like not on the YouTubes or Twitch or anything, so who are not media trained at all either. So we can get something prepared where we actually come in ready. But yeah, thanks for
yeah. If you have to leave, I'll answer you. But if you have to leave, that's fine. And if you ever want me to call into your show or whatever, I don't.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It could be set up as something that we have time to prepare for or not. I don't care. I'm quite busy, so I oftentimes do very little preparation because I work 90 hours a week and stuff like this. But
I agree. I hop on at 10 p.m. randomly. Yeah.
And so thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. There's another person on, so I'll talk to him. But I am going to answer your position real quick if you don't mind. And you don't have to stay. That's fine. So all right, man. Take it easy.
All right, I'll be watching. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I think that the problem with that is. That he sort of contradicts himself in there. So if I'm to believe that Dan Osborne, for example, was to do the exact same policies, but he said, well, I know Dan Osborne's a good guy. He didn't pal around with the Clintons and Epsteins. So therefore these tariffs are good. They'll be good because he's coming from a good place. No, he wouldn't say that anyways. And secondly, if this is all just about crony capitalism, what Trump's doing, then why is pretty much almost every billionaire, including Elon Musk, out there saying, no, this tariff strategy is a mistake. We're losing tons of money. In fact, he even admitted that what Trump's doing is a radical departure from the status quo. The status quo that was benefiting the very oligarchs that he talked about that Trump pals around with. The Clintons, the Epstein-type associate people. So it's clear, regardless, like, I'm just tired of, like, people that want to read into Trump's mind and say, I just know he's a bad dude, so anything he's doing isn't to benefit the country. It's just to benefit himself and his, like, they don't know that. That's just their own opinion is that they're putting in there. Real quick, Emily, what's up? Thanks for being a member 6 months. Says, Rob, is it wrong to put marks in your own books? I don't think so. I mark up my own books. I guess it depends on what type of a book. But if it's a book that I'm using that, like, for research, etc. But ultimately, I thought that the conversation ended fine, but I think it was clear that once we got into territory he wasn't comfortable with, he kind of became flippant. resorted to interruption and things like that. And I don't think anything I said was off topic that wasn't germane to what we were talking about. When you're talking about the worst authoritarianism ever, you have to ask yourself, like, well, what are you willing to accept? If you would just hear me out and answer questions honestly and succinctly, I think that he was probably shocked that there was more agreement with me than he anticipated. I think that oftentimes the book on me is, I'll never criticize Trump. I just defend Trump all the time. That's not it at all. At all. Oftentimes my audience gets upset because I'll do entire shows where I'm like, I don't like what Trump's doing. I know huge portions of my audience didn't like when I talked about Khalil and said, I don't know. I think that thinking through it, that yes, they're not entitled, a non-citizen who's here legally isn't entitled to the same amount of free speech as us, but I do have problems if he's just being removed for speech. I think that there should be a level that we're allowed to remove people, but I would like the Trump administration to explain, this is the level that was crossed, this is why we don't accept it, and I'm sorry, it reeks of, well, it's because it was criticism of Israel. If he would have criticized Christianity, if he would have criticized white people, etc., conservatives, it probably wouldn't have risen to this level. I don't know how long I have, but Jimothy's been waiting patiently. So Jimothy, thank you so much for waiting patiently. I really appreciate it. What do you got? What would you like to talk about this evening?
Hey Rob, thanks for having me. I
No problem.
really appreciate what you do on YouTube. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the tariffs. I had a question, and I just kind of want your opinion. I don't know if this is really going to be a debate necessarily, but it seems to me like one of the key concepts with the Trump tariffs is bringing industry back to the United States from overseas, right? And what I've been seeing in the news and in the media recently, it seems like, Trump is willing to drop the tariffs if other countries are willing to drop the tariffs on their end. And so I'm kind of wondering what is that going to do for bringing industry back to America if that's all we're really going to get out of that is cheaper products, which I would argue that the American middle and lower class need more than cheaper products. We need a competitive job market. I'm just curious your opinion on that.
Yeah, so it's complicated for various reasons. So I'll answer that in the second portion of this specifically. But it's hard to know exactly what Trump wants, and I think that that's intentional, right? Because you have people like Peter Navarro that are out there and saying it has nothing to do with reciprocal tariffs, right? What it has to do with, it is unsustainable for the United States to continue to have massive trade deficits. And so what they're seeking is zero trade deficit. And so quite simply, even if a country has no trade barriers whatsoever to the United States, but it just so happens through the natural free markets that we sell $1 billion worth of stuff to them and they sell $10 billion worth of stuff to us, then we are going to put barriers up to ensure that that number is equal. If we sell 1 million, they're only selling 1 million. If they want more than that, then they have to buy more for us. And there is a certain train of thought that is saying that that's what Trump's seeking. So it's not about reciprocal tariffs. And when you look at the equation they used, they basically started with the default 10% tariff. And then when they said we've just done half of what they've done, the actual number and the percentages came from basically just looking at the percentage of the trade deficit. So if we sold 90% less, if we had a 90% deficit, then we said we'll tariff you at 45%. And that's half of what you've done to us. Sometimes that is because of trade barriers, tariffs that they've done. Sometimes it's not, right? So there is that mindset of, well, is this just about eliminating reciprocal tariffs or is it something else? In addition to that, I've heard people talk about quite intelligently on this, that there are things that are going on behind the scenes that are even more to it than this. Everyone's heard talk of, well, actually, this is about getting the Fed to cut rates because we have to refinance $9 billion that Biden loaned, or $9 trillion, that Biden borrowed. And so we want lower rates to refinance that. And so Trump's purposely going harsher in hopes that there's a market correction and lowers, which will convince the feds to then cut rates, which means that we when refinance that, it's at a lower interest rate so that will save the United States trillions of dollars. There's that part of it. And then I heard this gentleman talking, I can't remember his name, but I'll try to find a link to this video where he's talking about this, that ultimately J.D. Vance has for years talked about the problem with the United States is that our main export is U.S. dollars, that with the U.S. becoming the world reserve currency, what we've done in our country is artificially inflated finance institutions institutions and hollowed out manufacturing. And the problem is that won't be sustainable in the future. And so this person said that he envisions a world where the world starts to understand that the dollar will no longer be pegged as the world reserve currency, which means that we'll go back to something more stable like gold. And because of that, he claims, and I haven't been able to back this up, that there's a bunch of gold that's flowing into the United States. Some of that has to do with unpredictability about tariffs and people putting their money in gold, but some of it has to do with people that are thinking, look, maybe the United States is taking postures, like J.D. Vance said, that we're no longer interested in being the world reserve currency, and instead we'll get away from fiat-based currencies and into more gold. Because of that, these tariffs could be a mechanism to try to drive that. I can't claim to be an expert on that, and I haven't heard anyone rebut that, so that could be complete bunk, but those are things I've heard. So is it as simple as it's just getting rid of reciprocal tariffs? I don't know. But to answer your second question, let's assume that's the case. Well, tariffs that other countries have, if we were to get them to drop those on its own, could encourage more businesses to be created in the United States. Because the way that a tariff could encourage business would be, well, you want access to the U.S. market. So you're Chevy, and you're considering buying a plant or building a plant in India or in the United States. And if you now build it in India, it'll be cheaper labor, so you could make more money even when it comes to shipping to the United States. But you plan on selling the majority of your vehicles in the United States. Let's say you anticipate 60%. And now this tariff will mean it will no longer be profitable. So instead, it'll be more profitable to move your country to the, or your company to the United States. We understand that's the theory behind it. But it would also work in the inverse. If without that, right now, Chevy's considering whether to build their plant in, say, France or in the United States, and they say, we'll build it in France because France has an 80% tariff against U.S. automakers. So we would otherwise have built it in the United States, but because of the tariffs that exist in Europe, we choose to build in Europe. And so eliminating those tariffs by itself could, in fact, encourage investment in the United States.
Well, and you're saying the tariffs from the other side. So say France has 80% tariff on American imports. The idea is build a plant in France so that we can just build and sell in France. And
you could still sell in the United States because there's no tariff there. So what's the disincentive to build in France?
And, the idea that, we're going to tariff you until you drop your tariffs against us just seems to me like it's a roundabout way of just going to a free trade agreement, which just goes back to the American worker having to compete on a global level rather than having to compete against each other as Americans. And that's
certainly true. Like envision a world with no trade barriers in any country. What we'll see is that would have hollowed out manufacturing in the United States. Yeah. Now, the problem is it's already happened. Yeah. Right. And so it's like there were ways to go about being more free trade, but easing that, not having the sudden shock that, like, basically over a 30-year period, we're not manufacturing anything. And all of these people that had these jobs. And again, I can't stress this enough. I'm not saying that it's the role of any government, let alone the United States government, to facilitate jobs that become obsolete. For example, if you were a carriage builder in the 1920s and the automobile comes along, I don't think the U.S. government should say, well, we feel bad for the carriage builder. We're going to ensure that they always have a job through subsidies, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is we left these people behind, and these weren't welfare queens. These weren't people that were engaged in unethical jobs. These were people that were doing jobs that were the backbone of the growth of this country when this country became the world superpower. People working in steel, people working in other manufacturing industries. And to look at them over the period of 1 or 2 generations and say, you've gone from not only being an integral part to this country and why we became a world superpower, and also having sort of the American dream where you're middle class, you have a wife, you have kids, you could afford a house, right? You're in this middle class. And now that's all been taken away from you, and you can't afford to have kids, and you and your wife are both working. And in addition to that, we've changed a bunch of cultural stuff that's not worth talking about here. Yeah. But what do you say to those people? That sucks. And I do have sympathy for those people, and I completely get what you're saying. I think there are other ways that we could go about, in addition to being free trade, that will make it more pleasant to bring back manufacturing. It will never be what it once was. One of those big things is lowering regulation, right? We should be getting the government out of the way as much as possible and ensuring that it's as easy as possible to build companies in the United States. Part of that is making sure that other countries' trade barriers are dismantled. Part of that is in making sure that barriers to wanting businesses built in the United States are dismantled. Right now, tax rates, right now, regulations, etc., make it unattractive to build companies in the United States. You could see that just on a state-by-state basis. I forget exactly what state it is. Is it Tennessee? Tennessee, I think, completely eliminated the state income tax. And like the business growth there has boomed just for that one thing. Right. And so I think that if you had a president that's, and Trump's, I'll finish real quick. Trump has tried to be massively deregulatory. And I think that in combination with the trade thing could, facilitate a more friendly business environment. But it won't be what it once was. It won't.
And I can say from my personal experience, what you're saying is absolutely true, because I live in South Dakota. We have no income tax, and the growth here has been explosive. I mean, construction just can't keep up. The construction demand out here is huge. I mean, you can make a living no problem as a construction worker out here in South Dakota. So
the only other question that's worth asking, is, do you, even if you're someone who has free trade principles, do you make exceptions where there are practices that you consider unethical, like slave labor? Right? Yeah. How do you compete with a company moving to a country that says we're going to pay people 10 cents an hour?
Yeah.
And there are questions around that. Like, what can the United States erect tariff barriers just for that, what we would consider immoral practice? The other side of that coin is, if those people aren't being coerced to that job and to them 10 cents is worth working it, who are we to intervene? So it is complicated. My default is someone who's small government is want the government to be involved as little as possible.
Yeah.
But as someone whose primary concern in this country is caring about the people in my life, those in rural America, and to see how town after town after town of mine has been hollowed out. And that's, again, I'm not talking about culturally. I'm not talking about corruption. I'm just talking financially and trade here. Like, I can't help but be like, I can't help but be like, this sucks. This was a raw deal for these people. We're treating United States like it's just economic cogs and the people are interchangeable. And as long as the GDP keeps dinging a higher number and the stock market keeps dinging a higher number, then that's good. We're doing good. And I don't think that's a good signifier of the health of a country.
Yeah, I've seen that too. I have another question for you. And I'm sure you've probably addressed this before, but I might have missed it at some point. What's the deal with Destiny? Because I'm somebody who found out about you through Destiny's channel. I'm a conservative who watched Destiny, trying to keep a bearing on what's going on the left wing side of politics. And I found out about you through him, and I'm so glad that I did. And I'm wondering, I don't know that you've been on any large left wing platforms like that since, and what happened with that, because I haven't seen, as far as I know, you haven't been on his platform in ages. So
I was blacklisted by Destiny because of a debate I did with him on January 6th. So you could go and you could watch the debate for yourself. I'll give you my version of it. You're free to listen to Destiny supporters talk about their version of it. Andrew Wilson did a debate with Destiny on what the definition of insurrection is, because Destiny pivoted to January 6th and the election season was the most important story in the world. So this was an insurrection, which meant Trump engaged in an insurrection, which meant that he wasn't eligible to be president of the United States and should be removed from the ballot, because they knew that they couldn't run on the record of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, because despite the bluster that how great everything was, it was abysmal and the American people knew it. So they had to run on legalities, just like the Democratic Party was doing. So that's the strategy that Destiny's employing. Andrew Wilson debates him, and Andrew's argument is basically, I don't have to define the term insurrection. I'll accept your definition and just say that it's overly broad. So I can't remember the specific definition, but it came from these two authors, and there was 4 points to what an insurrection was. Had to be a public cause. It had to be a gathering of two or more people. It had to use like violence, intimidation, and
this is the thing where he was talking about hippies smoking weed.
Yes, right.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
right.
okay,
So Andrew Wilson gets him to admit in the context of this debate that if you had three hippies that were breaking the law by smoking weed and they start screaming at police, then that's an insurrection. And Destiny admits that in the debate. And Andrew Wilson, I think, is correct. I don't even have to say what an insurrection is to say that your definition is absurd and it's overly broad, and it would basically make thousands of actions in the United States every year an insurrection, which is but it's like if everything's racist, then nothing's racist.
Exactly,
If everything's an insurrection, then nothing's an insurrection, and the word means nothing. So we don't care that you're saying that Trump engaged in an insurrection, which I think is a totally valid debate strategy on Andrew Wilson's part. Destiny threw a shit fit about that, and it wasn't fair, and oh my God, he wouldn't. So this is going to get long-winded. I'll try to make it as short as possible. A Destiny orbiter named Bisco and some other people have been wanting me to do a debate with them about the standard legal definition of the term insurrection. I don't really care what the standard legal definition of the term insurrection is. I care that there's a double standard in how it's employed. For example, when Kamala Harris promotes a bail fund of people that, through the definition that people like Destiny and Pisco would use, were engaged in an insurrection, public cause, using violence against police stations, burning them down, and Kamala Harris was promoting a bail fund. If Trump engaged in an insurrection for saying fight like hell about January 6th, then certainly Kamala Harris engaged in an insurrection, so she should be kept off the ballot as well. I don't give a shit what you say the standard legal definition should be. But I agreed to do that debate with Pisco on the condition that half of the debate would be that we talk about the double standard and how it's applied. Pisco agreed to that. Now, in the context of this, we were talking behind the scenes. I do this home healthcare job, and I was at work a ridiculous amount of hours, and then I was immediately going on a vacation and then back to work. So for like 10 days, I was like, I can't do the debate for like at least 10 days. Pisco sent me where his definition came from, the legal paper. I was like, I'll get to it if I can, but also I have my phone. So I didn't really have a chance to really read things succinctly. In the context of that, I was just like Googling these authors and seeing what they said. And I read a couple of like 2 to 3 page reviews of the paper, and I put in AI. And Claude AI, I put in AI like, well, what do they think about state insurrections?
Oh boy, I remember this.
Right.
Okay,
So then Destiny reaches out to me during the context of this and says, hey, do you want to have this same debate? Basically, I say, sure. I was committed to actually giving a definition of the term insurrection so Destiny couldn't cry about it. When I get off work, literally the day I got off work and vacation, like 10, 11 days later, I haven't had time to do any research. I messaged Destiny, said, hey, I haven't had time to do any research. Do you want to do this debate tonight? He says, sure. Cool. So we do the debate that night. I say, I'm more than willing to debate my definition of the term insurrection and your definition of the term insurrection, as long as you're willing to debate the double standards, how it's applied for the second half of this debate. He says yes. For basically 4 hours, we debated my definition and Destiny's definition of the term insurrection. In the middle of that debate, I said, can you do state insurrections? He said he wasn't sure. He didn't think so. I think your authors, Bowden Paulson, say you can. He said, I don't think so. I brought up the screenshot that I had. It happened to be through AI. I thought it was one of the articles I read, which I also screenshotted. I gave it to him. About a minute and a half later, he said, is this an AI review? Is it ChatGPT? I said, no, it's Claude. The debate proceeds apace. He ends up agreeing that the paper says basically what I said. It said that there can be state insurrections. We debate for another 3 hours or so. Towards the end of that debate, we have 10 minutes of talking about what I wanted to talk about. We then get into what the court case in Colorado said defined as insurrection. Destiny's on his back foot. He realizes that he hasn't read the source material that he's claiming to, or he's misrepresenting it. He gets frustrated. He rage quits. I didn't think it was a big deal. It was late at night. I figured we'd pick up the debate some other day. He then post hoc justifies after the debate because he saw his audience saying this. He will no longer debate me, and I'm completely blacklisted from his channel because I used AI and I lied about it.
That's ridiculous.
So that's why you haven't seen me on Destiny's channel. He blocked me on X. He blacklisted me and said he's unwilling to ever debate me again. That's it. I'm not going to kiss his ass. I don't care to like reach out to him and try to mend bridges or whatever. I just don't care. As far as I'm concerned, he lied to me. I debated the exact topic that he wanted for almost 4 hours, which almost no one else would do. And as soon as we started to talk about the topic that he agreed to debate me on, he rage quit and then blacklisted me. That's what happened.
So just a quick follow-up question. By the way, I appreciate you standing on that, not to come groveling back to him or apologize because you did nothing wrong. But if he was to have a turn of heart and decide to unblacklist you, unblock you, whatever, would you debate him or be on his platform again?
Maybe, probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, there's other considerations to have. Like, after the assassination attempt of Trump, where he was out there saying, oh, you know, that Trump supporter, the firefighter that died, Corey Compatore, he had it coming. Like,
that was despicable.
Right. I struggle because part of me says that I don't want to engage with anyone who's willing to call for death of political opponents that they disagree with. One, because the immorality of it, but second, because, well, if they're willing to call for the death of Corey Compatore, maybe they're willing to call for the death of me.
Oh,
so
yeah,
do I want to debate someone who has 12,000 people watching live that maybe he's signaling to his audience that I should die? Maybe not. Maybe it's more trouble than it's worth. And maybe it doesn't raise the level of dying, but maybe it's doxing or trying to get someone canceled, fired, etc. So I don't know that I want to engage with it. I gave him the benefit of the doubt after that and said, well, I thought he was just spiraling out of control and was desperate because he saw that as a moment that maybe Trump was gaining momentum and would possibly win. But I think that his comments that he's been making since then really show that I think in his heart of hearts, he wants to see Trump dead. And so I would have to question morally whether I want to engage with someone like that. If I was to engage with him, it would heavily be on the condition that we talk about his violent rhetoric.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd probably do that.
All right. Well, that answers pretty much all my questions. So I appreciate it, Rob. Thanks for having me.
No problem. I'll be doing a call-in show probably around 9 a.m. tomorrow if you're interested, if you have any more questions. So, but thank you so much for calling in. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Take it easy, Jimmy. Yeah. So there's the Destiny stuff. Okay. So to go back to, I forget his name. Was it Joland? To go back to Joland, the gentleman that debated me with there a couple hours. I think that ultimately it's sort of, I got stuff going on tomorrow evening, so I got to do an early show tomorrow. I'll be out of town Friday evening and Saturday. I'm going to visit some friends with my son. We're going to have a lot of fun. So, ultimately with the gentleman that called in, I believe his name was Joland. I enjoyed the conversation. I really did. But I think you could see it's constantly something that I can't help but laugh at the double standard of Trump's super authoritarian and you're taking funding from Colombia. You literally told people that they couldn't operate their business. Yeah, but Republicans. Yes, I criticize them. Yes, but you're Monday morning quarterbacking. No, I said it at the time. Right? The problem is you could see, and I think that the biggest important thing to see there, ideologically, the differences are how his perspective is a perspective of if you're questioning, then you default to giving the government the power to be authoritarian. Whereas my position is the default should be, no, the impetus is on the government and the people who seek to be authoritarian to prove to you why it's necessary. It's not just saying, well, we don't know, so we'll lock people down. That's the fundamental difference, and I've seen this all throughout COVID. And when you're saying Trump is the most authoritarian president ever, and I'm just trying to get simple concessions but telling people things like you can't go to your place of business, you can't leave your home, you can't go to a public park, you can't go to a public beach, that's more of an authoritarian infringement on their rights than saying the government will no longer fund this university. Can you admit that? And he's like, no, I can't. No. And that to me is a telltale sign. You're not really interested in having a good faith discussion on this particular aspect. The truth is, when you're calling Trump an authoritarian, you don't think authoritarianism's bad. You think that it's fine as long as it's in the name of a cause that you agree with. Well, that's how Trump feels. And that's how millions of Trump supporters feel. We don't care. If you support Hamas, get the heck out. And for you to say, wait a minute, I have a problem with that. I'm sorry, that falls on deaf ears coming from a person that says, well, that's how I felt about lockdowns. Me, on the other hand, to the chagrin of many of the supporters of mine, said, wait a minute, I do have problems with the way that the Trump administration is going about this. That's the difference. And so the irony of him being like, you're a propagandist, you're not interested in truth. I'm being as transparent as possible. I'm criticizing what I see as policies that are authoritarian. Now, there are differences, and I'm explaining, and I'm trying to say this is exactly my position. I think that my position is that non-citizens that are here legally have more free speech rights than illegals. Illegals could just go no matter what. But if someone's here on a student visa or some sort of visa or a green card, yeah, I don't think that I particularly want them to be removed because they say something that's politically unpopular. The example I gave is, what if a Democrat comes into office and decides we're going to remove all visa holders that say we should stop funding Ukraine? We're going to say that's pro-Putin, you're out. I would say I would have a problem with that. Similarly, I don't want to remove everyone that says Israel's engaged in a genocide in Palestine. Now, is that exactly what's going on with all these people? Now you hear the comments, oh no, it was worse. They occupied a library. They did this, that, and the other. Deck Pro 103, thank you so much for the 5 gifted memberships. I appreciate it. But I'm just trying to say what my principle is and what I think about free speech, etc. And then as you further go down the rabbit hole, because now it's a question of free speech, right? You can see the problems with the ideology. He's like, no, I think that we don't have the right to deport someone who's burning an American flag and saying death to America. Well, that seems pretty crazy. We're obligated to take visas from people that are publicly calling for the death of the country. And then he sort of backtracks on that and he's like, well, I guess that would be more than just speech, but ultimately I'm pro free speech. And you could see like the tenuous nature, like he hadn't thought this position through. And like, to me, sort of, that's a different question than the legality. If the law says X, even if you don't think that's the way the country should operate, well, that's the way the law says. That's the answer there. But as individuals, we could say, if you have a problem with the way that Trump's proffering things now, aside from, because I think that unfortunately there are a lot of legal experts that sort of disagree with what his position will be. Good Logic being one of them, who's I think is a tremendous lawyer. Good Logic is quite convinced that we can basically, deporting people is not considered a punishment, and you can basically deport people for whatever reason you want. Now, there are clearly barriers to that. Supreme Court's apparently saying if there is an order that you can't deport someone to a certain country from a judge, the executive branch can't violate that order. That's a different question, though. And so then when you listen to him, like, explain that he's really for free speech, but not if you're within 15 feet of an abortion center yelling. Okay, then what if you're within 15 feet of a university yelling? You're starting to see the tenuous nature of and unfortunately, I think he exhibited through the previous conversation about COVID, sort of how his bias will allow him to cheer for authoritarianism when it isn't a cause that he believes. And I see this all the time. We haven't even got to questions of free speech of the censorship that he said, no one got censored on discussions of COVID. I heard them all the time. We actually had government agencies like CISA that was approaching social media companies, basically using a carrot and stick approach, suggesting that they censor things like disinformation. We have they were trying to create a disinformation council. We've gone over it in the show many, many times. But I bet he didn't have problems with that. I bet if we went down that rabbit hole, he'd say, well, those people were saying dangerous things. And social media is private companies. They have the right to censor people. And the government wasn't saying you have to censor them. They were just suggesting. So to then say, but I support the free speech of this non-citizen who's pro-Palestine, it falls on deaf ears for me. And again, I think it was evident by the fact that he was being so flippant. Oh, video games kill more people than anyone, blah, blah, blah. And just the flippancy and the sort of interrupting. I think he mistakenly believed that I'm just going to defend Trump no matter what. And everyone who's watched my channel, even people like HN that disagree with me, could see that since the onset of them going after these students, I've said, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of this. Since the onset. So again, I think he mistakenly assumes, well, you're going to be what I assume a Trump supporter is and agree with everything about that. And that's not the case whatsoever. You could also see that when he's like, oh, well, who was president at the start of lockdowns? Yeah, Trump. I heavily criticized him. Same with Republicans. Yep. I did and will and continue to do so. There is no perfect candidate for president. There is no perfect president. I was forced to make a binary choice between Donald Trump, who I think is at least trying to disrupt the corrupt status quo that screwed so many people over, versus Kamala Harris, who was just another figurehead to repeat the Obama, Biden, Kamala administrations. We saw where that led. We saw the inflation. We saw the porous border. So, that's ultimately. Now, I think that once he allowed the conversation to reach the natural conclusion on what I was saying, no, dude, I don't think Trump's doing the most authoritarian stuff when we could just look at the previous administration. And I think there were things that were objectively more authoritarian. But if you want to just focus on what I think about these current things, I have no problem discussing that as well. The debate didn't happen. Instead, I talked to another person that we basically had a debate that I thought went well. Oh, you know that, Raceland. Yeah, I thought it went very well. I don't know. Ask the audience. We'll put a link, or we'll in 1 second we'll pull the audience, and then I'm going to get out of here. But ultimately, that's what I feel about that discussion. And if the debate would have proceeded apace tonight, now it's going to be next Thursday, about the success of Trump, I can't tell you with 100% certainty that Trump's tariff plan will work. I could say that I think that at least he's trying something, which is more than basically every president in my lifetime's done. At least he's claiming that he's trying to do things for the manufacturing workers in the United States and take power back from the unelected bureaucrats and basically a bunch of globalists in places like the EU that don't give two hoots about us. But I don't know that it'll work. I have my skepticism. I've voiced it several times this week alone. But it's striking to me like how so many times people are unwilling to just admit like the most basic of things. The point I was trying to get, for example, when I said, what's the number one cause of death for people under 18? Almost everyone says, well, it's firearms. That's debatable, but I would say abortion nonetheless. So if a president said, well, we're going to have lockdowns in inner city to stop firearm deaths, what would a Democrat say about that? They would say that's absurd. And if your only answer is, but look at how many people are dying, you would say, yeah, but that's not sufficient. You would have to prove that that violation of people's Bill of Rights protections was necessary to curb these deaths. You would have to answer a bunch of questions. And so when I'm asking him, well, why did you support lockdowns? Why did Biden support lockdowns? Why did, Trump or any of these people support lockdowns? And instead of answering questions, they just said, what do you want grandma to die? He does the exact same thing. Oh, you're just a propagandist and I could tell you facts and you won't listen to them and look at how many people died and that's that. That's the exact mentality that I'm criticizing. It's not sufficient to say, but look, there's a problem. You could do that with a litany of things. Climate change, big problem, might kill us all. We don't know, lock people down. Terrorism could kill us all. We don't know, lock people down. Where does it stop? Wouldn't be hard to make either climate change, terrorism, or a litany of other diseases or other causes to say, this could be a super huge impact that will affect billions of people. Therefore, we're justified. There has to be more than just saying it could be really bad. And if you don't, what you've shown is that you're willing to give in to authoritarian impulses based on your fear when it's a cause that you believe in. And so then when another person says, we adapt that same mentality. We think one cause we believe in is people that are guests of our country that are terrorist sympathizers. We think that's a cause that's worth. We think they're harassing people on college campuses and destroying our college campuses. Even if you're like, well, that's not a direct apples to apples comparison. Here's one that's closer. Trump may very well say, we're revoking all student visas from China. Why? Because there's so many people that are spies that come in here and we're training people to go back to the country that's our biggest enemy. We don't want them. Climate lockdowns will probably come at some point in the future imaginarium. But yes, it's certain that they were planning for that. Oh, yes, 20,000 subs. I thought he was a reasonable debater. I didn't think once the smugness sort of wore off by towards the end of the debate, I thought it was going fine. I've committed myself to trying to be more peaceable in these debates. I hope it showed up tonight. Okay, so question one. Who do you think got the better of the interactions between me and Jola? If you think I won, press 1. If you think Jola won, press 2. I'm going to type in my answer. I won. But no, I'm willing to get feedback. Now, clearly it's a little different because there wasn't a debate prompt or anything like that, and there were some areas of agreement. HN, thank you. If HN would have put 1, I would have been scared. This is the biggest vote of confidence I have. No, he certainly wasn't the worst lefty I've debated. Not at all. Thank you, HN. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the conversation. I'm glad that someone called in. I really am. And then the other question I have was, you don't have to put 1 or 2 to the list. You can still keep answering 1 or 2 if you like. But the other question I have was, did people think that, like, did it come across that I had a calmer demeanor? And did people find that? Because I could have, when he was interrupting me, been like, shut the fuck up. I could have went with that. But I told myself going into tonight when I thought I was debating someone else, I'm going to start trying to just realize, like, I'm 40 now. Let's... yeah, there I just swore there too. Yeah, I know some people like Angry Rob, but I think I'm going to try. I'm not going to say I'm never going to get angry, particularly in shows when I'm by myself. So yeah, I hope that came across, and I hope people in Jola's audience, it came across to them as like, guy's pretty reasonable, even if I disagree with him. He was defending his positions quite well. Am I supposed to get grumpier the older I get? Yeah, but less childish, hopefully. I'm still very childish. So, all right. Well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed the show. I do apologize that the regular scheduled debate didn't occur. I hope, and I do seriously thank Jola, and I thank Grid Motorsports, and I thank Jimothy that were all willing to jump in there. I think it made the show much better because I literally had no time to prepare today. And to the smallest extent that I was prepared to go, it was to debate someone. And so if no one would have called in or debated, I don't know what we would have talked about. It would have probably been like an hour show talking about Luka Doncic and joking. That's the direction it was heading. So, what time's the morning show? We're going to shoot for 9 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. And that'll be a call-in show. So you don't have to disagree with me. You can call in within reason and talk about any topic that you want. So 9 a.m. Eastern time. It might give or take 10, 15 minutes, just depending on getting breakfast for my man and stuff like that. But yeah, I enjoyed it. So I hope you all did as well. I think the debates are my favorite thing to do. Discussions with people that disagree with me are my favorite things to do. So I hope that comes across. 6 a.m. too early for you? Sorry. I prefer to do, listen, once my son starts going to school, when I'm home doing streams, it's going to be during the day because I want to maximize my time with my wife and my son. And so if there's time where my son's not going to be home, that is the best time for me to stream. So once he starts going to school and he's going like 9 to 3, when I'm home on like Thursdays and Fridays, I'm going to be streaming sometime in between 9 and 3. And I know that's not the most convenient for people, but I don't know what else to do because I love my son and I want to hang out with him. And I don't want to not be with him all day while I'm just messing around the house. And then all of a sudden him get home from school and be like, okay, I got to go upstairs. See you tomorrow. Like it sucks. That's the worst part of streaming. The worst part of streaming is I could be downstairs with the coolest wife and coolest son in the world. That's the hardest part. And working the hours I do and then getting home from work and looking at my son and having dinner with him and be like, okay, I got to go upstairs now. It sucks. So when I get the opportunity, I'll be streaming in hours that are more, that is my number one priority, maximizing my time with my family. So how's my diet? Not the greatest. I did a fast. It did pretty good. Then work got crappy and I was going to start this keto diet. So I haven't yet. It's not bad. My diet's been better than it's been in years past, but it's not great. And so I do plan on starting a keto diet here soon. I just got to get around to it. But yeah. My height, I weighed 320 pounds. Now I weigh close to 260. So 260 is not good for a guy who's 5'8". But you know. Yeah, I think the new headphones do help me speak softer because I can actually hear my voice through the headphone, and I think that makes a big difference. So nah, I'm not going to do carnivore. I'm going to do keto. I've decided with the wife because the wife is going to do it with me and she didn't think she could do carnivore, but she thinks she can do keto. So that's going to be the plan. And I think that keto is a reasonable, compromise there. Yeah, it's certainly better than 300. I feel much better too, weighing less. So, all right. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you all tomorrow around 9 a.m. Thanks to everyone who participated, donated, active in the chat, called in. I appreciate you all. We'll talk to you all tomorrow. As always, have a good one.